Wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera. Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan. Pagi. Selamat pagi Bapak, Ibu, teman-teman, sahabat Apari. Selamat datang dan selamat bergabung di perhelatan kita pagi hari ini, yaitu Trade Credit Insurance Webinar dengan tema
Economic Outlook of Indonesia
and Asia amid COVID-19.
This event is the second joint collaboration program among Asosiasi Ahli Pialang Asuransi dan Reasuransi Indonesia atau disingkat Apari dan Coface serta Sompo Insurance. Bapak, Ibu, teman-teman sekalian, sahabat Apari, pada kesempatan webinar kali ini kita akan membahas dan berdiskusi tentang banyak hal ya, utamanya mengenai prospek ekonomi Asia dan menjelaskan bagaimana asuransi kredit perdagangan di era yang lingkungan strategisnya ini sudah berubah itu dapat membantu klien dalam mengamankan khususnya piutang dagang mereka. Saya, Iputu Kusuma Hadiwijaya, didampingi oleh dua rekan saya yang cantik ya, di kiri dan kanan saya, yang sebelah kiri.
Saya Wina.
Dan saya Cici Marsiana.
Kami bertiga akan menjadi moderator atau host yang akan memandu Bapak, Ibu, dan teman-teman serta sahabat Apari dalam perhelatan pagi hari ini. Oke, by the way, kalau sama Mbak Wina saya udah kenal. Mbak Wina itu aktif di mana sekarang, Mbak Wina?
Saya di Apari di BP3, Badan Pengembangan Pendidikan dan Profesi.
Oke, ini Mbak Wina yang ngadain pendidikan nih teman-teman. Kemudian saya sendiri Putu saat ini di Apari aktif sebagai ketua 3 dan ini ada satu, ini anggota Apari bukan ya?
Mohon maaf, saya ingin menjadi anggota Apari tapi belum bisa.
Oh ikut, harus ikut pendidikan,
harus ikut ya,
biar jadi anggota Apari Mbak Cici.
Kebetulan saya numpang populer nih Pak Putu ya.
Numpang populer, oke. Kita bisa populer setiap hari Kamis, kita selalu ngadain acara. Setelah pagi ini pun nanti siang ya Mbak Wina ya, insya Allah kita juga akan ada acara yang lain Mbak. Jadi jadi anggota Apari.
Oh siap.
Ntar jadi host bareng-bareng kita biar tambah populer. Boleh, Cici.
Ya, saya Cici Marsiana, saya dari Sompo Insurance Indonesia dan saya dari Operational Marketing Pak Putu.
Oke, I see. Oke, sebelum kita lanjutkan mungkin nggak ada salahnya kita coba sapa teman-teman kita dulu ya Mbak Cici. Mbak Wina, jadi alhamdulillah sampai dengan pagi ini dan detik ini sudah ada sekitar 232 yang sudah join di kanal YouTube. Lagi-lagi selamat datang Bapak Ibu teman-teman sahabat Apari. Ini akan terus bertambah ya, pastinya ya, semakin siang ya. Yang sudah terdaftar itu, yang daftar ada berapa? Ada 4.530 juta.
Saya lebihin lagi boleh Pak, 40.500.
Jadi pasti akan tambah banyak.
Betul.
Beberapa yang udah hadir ini teman-teman ada Debbie Anggraini dari Sompo Insurance, kemudian ada
selamat datang Mbak Debbie.
Iya, Muhammad Soroso dari Sarana Jasa Janesia Utama. Ada banyak nih udah yang datang. Saya juga tadi sempat lihat ada Pak Suwandi Kendi dari IBS. Selamat pagi Pak Suwandi. Teman kita di Apari juga dari E.ON, Bagus Dharma juga. Pagi beli Dharma, Kengken kabar. Jadi banyak nih, ada Indar Atmojo juga sudah hadir. Pak Munawar Usman bilang hadir katanya. Kemudian
ada Pak Munawar ya, ada Pak Munawar. Halo Pak Munawar, apa kabar Pak Munawar? Ada
Sylvia Yan, hei Bu Sylvie dari Profis Mitra Sinergi. Biasanya pagi-pagi dia suka olahraga tuh kalau Bu Sylvie, kebiasaannya.
Ada Pak Wun tuh.
Ada Pak Wun juga, pagi Pak Wun. Kemudian ada Irfan Hafiz dari DSR. Jadi udah banyak nih. Jadi 238 sampai detik ini kita masih tunggu kehadiran Bapak Ibu, teman-teman sahabat Apari. Oke, Mbak Cici.
Ya, Pak Putu.
Dan Mbak Wina. Jadi pagi hari ini kita mengadakan acara Apari ini terkait dengan memang ini upaya dari Apari senantiasa ingin meningkatkan pengetahuan dan keterampilan SDM, Mbak Cici. Di Apari memang kita secara reguler selalu mengadakan acara-acara ini dalam upaya untuk meningkatkan kompetensi, pengetahuan maupun keterampilan dari anggota Apari. Nah, acara ini juga adalah cara dari para anggota untuk bisa mempertahankan status keanggotaan Apari melalui program pengembangan profesi berkelanjutan, karena teman-teman anggota Apari yang ikut di acara ini akan dapat poin
Oh, dapat poin, Pak.
Dapat poin gratis. Berapa
Poin
Mbak Wina poinnya?
gratis? Oh, luar biasa.
30 SKP untuk anggota Apari,
Dan yang Anzif juga dapat ya?
dapat 3 CIP score.
Tuh.
Jadi
kita di
harus
sini-
hadir dong ya, Pak, harusnya ya.
Betul, dapat gratisan
Dapat
poin,
gratisan
bukan
poin.
gratisan poin aja, bukan cuma vaksin yang kasih gratis, di sini juga dikasih.
Poin gotong royong berarti nih ya, Pak.
Nah ini poin SKP gotong royong.
Yes, ya.
Acara gratis, poin gratis.
Luar
Kurang
biasa.
generous apa?
Kurang generous
Apari?
apa ya, Bu ya?
Iya, benar-benar. Dan Bapak Ibu, teman-teman, sahabat Apari, kita tahu bahwa saat ini lingkungan strategis sudah berubah ya. Utamanya terjadinya pandemi COVID-19 ini telah merubah konstelasi di semua bidang. Di setiap industri sudah mengalami perubahan akibat pandemi COVID-19. Karenanya kemudian ada banyak cara untuk melakukan improvisasi. Salah satunya adalah bagaimana cara memitigasi resiko terkait dengan kejadian-kejadian yang dialami di berubahnya lingkungan strategis, ya khususnya lingkungan strategis ekonomi. Dan kita pikir salah satu cara gitu ya dalam berbisnis yang harus dimitigasi resikonya adalah dengan melakukan semacam
Pencegahan mungkin ya, Pak.
ya pencegahan atau financing ya,
Ya,
melalui cara-cara
financing
yang
yang
berbeda.
betul.
Yaitu salah satunya adalah trade credit insurance ya,
insurance.
Mbak Wina.
Asuransi kredit perdagangan ya, Pak
Asuransi
Putri ya.
kredit perdagangan.
I see. Menurut pandangan Mbak Cici atau Mbak Wina, kenapa sih TCI atau asuransi kredit perdagangan itu menjadi penting, khususnya di era pandemi seperti sekarang?
Baik, saya dulu, Mbak Cici dulu.
Mbak Wina mungkin silakan, saya serahkan dulu.
Baik, dengan kondisi yang sulit seperti ini, slowing down, transactional, jadi semakin banyak ketidakpastian, banyak uncertainty, dan untuk menjaga itu, walaupun sebelum COVID terjadi, uncertainty itu ada, tapi tidak setinggi sekarang. Karena memang slowing down ekonomik, karena memang slowing down kegiatan juga. Tapi bukan berarti transaksi perdagangan berhenti, tidak. Banyak sektor-sektor khusus yang perdagangannya tetap berjalan, tetap terjadi. Dan untuk menjamin risiko atau memitigasi risiko jika terjadi keterlambatan membayar
I see.
yang mengakibatkan
Betul.
tidak bayar.
I see.
Nah, itu bisa dimitigasi dengan kredit insurance.
I see. Betul, betul,
Dan
betul.
ini Pak, juga menjadi salah satu persyaratan untuk pengambilan kredit itu adalah trade credit insurance. Jadi memang sepertinya sudah cukup wajib ya bagi para perusahaan-perusahaan atau klien untuk memiliki sebuah perlindungan sehingga mereka mudah untuk mendapatkan kredit ya.
I see.
Dan dengan ada produk baru yang akan kita luncurkan pada hari ini yaitu Trade Liner, dan ini juga akan mempermudah nih bagi klien-klien, rekan-rekan sahabat Apari semua, dan ini bisa mempermudah para klien kita juga nantinya gitu.
I see, oke. Ya, jadi artinya acara atau perhelatan kita pagi ini tuh sangat penting ya, karena
Sangat
akan
penting
memberikan
sekali, Pak
wawasan,
Putu dan Mbak Wina.
menjadi referensi untuk kita semua, menjadi lebih tahu ya bagaimana menyikapi hal-hal dan kemudian membuat terobosan bagi klien-klien kita terkait dengan membantu mereka di bisnis mereka, begitu ya Mbak Wina,
Betul sekali,
Mbak
betul
Cici ya.
sekali.
Oke, jadi acara hari ini itu terselenggara atas kerjasama ya, Mbak Wina ya.
Ya, jadi acara pada hari ini bisa terselenggara itu dengan kerjasama dari antara Apari, Sompo, dan Coface. Nah, sebagai bentuk apresiasi dari kami host di sini, izinkan saya untuk berpantun sedikit.
Ih, ada pantun.
Saya
Nggak kalah
cakep-cakep
sama
nih,
ketua
Pak,
umum.
ya. Mantap, cakep gitu ya, boleh.
Siap.
oke.
Siap-siap ya.
Siap.
Anak tupai bawa kenari,
Cakep.
tergopoh-gopoh ke pohon kapas.
Cakep.
Mari menyimak webinar TCI Apari yang terselenggara atas kerjasama Sompo Insurance dan Coface.
Mantap.
Widih, ini dia nih. Kalau di Apari begitu, harus ada pantun. Oke, seperti yang disampaikan oleh Mbak Wina, jadi terima kasih banyak, thank you very much for Sompo Insurance and Coface as main sponsor that enable this event to be held in this spacious occasion. Sekali lagi terima kasih kepada Coface dan Sompo Insurance.
Terima kasih. Dan acara hari ini juga sesuai dengan protokol kesehatan yang diterapkan. Jadi seluruh kru dan panitia yang bertugas di Hotel Ashley sudah menjalani swab antigen. Jadi semuanya sudah, insya Allah sudah aman dan sudah negatif.
Oke, aman, alhamdulillah. Oke, kita mungkin sekarang lanjut ke agenda acara kita hari ini
Iya,
ya.
Pak,
Mungkin
betul.
apa-apa aja ya agenda kita hari ini.
Betul, Pak.
Yang pertama nanti akan ada sambutan dulu Bapak Ibu, teman-teman sahabat
Yes.
Apari, sambutan yang diberikan oleh Bapak Bambang Suseno sebagai Ketua Umum atau Chairman Apari, diikuti oleh Bapak Erik Dimit sebagai Presiden Director dan CEO Sompo Insurance Indonesia.
Kemudian presentasi pertama oleh Mr. Bernard Al sebagai Regional Economist Coface untuk Asia Pasifik dengan tema Economic Outlook of Asia Pacific amid COVID-19.
Dilanjutkan dengan presentasi kedua oleh dua orang narasumber yaitu Mr. Brad Taylor sebagai Vice President and Head of Risk Underwriting Southeast Asia Coface dan Mr. Beng Ho sebagai Senior Risk Underwriter Asia Pacific Coface dengan tema Risk Underwriting Outlook of Trade Markets for Indonesian Companies.
Dan dilanjutkan dalam presentasi ketiga dengan tema Trading on Credit yang akan disampaikan oleh sahabat kita anggota Apari juga, Om Riki Natapraja sebagai juga Deputy Chief Sales Office dan Local Sales Distribution and Country Head of Credit Insurance di Sompo Insurance Indonesia.
Kemudian Mr. Chris Murphy sebagai Regional Head of Mid Market and Partners Asia Pacific Coface akan memberikan pemaparan dengan tema How Credit Insurance Can Help Your Customers.
Dan kemudian di presentasi terakhir kita ada Miss Karen Ong sebagai Regional CGS Account Manager Asia Pacific Coface yang akan menyampaikan presentasi bertema Introduction and Launch of Trade Liner Coface and Sompo Insurance New Trade Credit Insurance Solution.
Kemudian ada pemberian penghargaan Best Trade Credit Insurance Broker Awards. Dilanjutkan dengan sesi Q&A. Kalau nggak salah nih Q&A ada prize-nya ya Pak ya?
Benar
Betul sekali.
banget Mbak Winas. So, kita ingin pastikan Bapak Ibu, sahabat Apari, teman-teman sekalian untuk tetap stay tune di kanal YouTube ini dari pagi sampai siang hari ini karena akan ada hal-hal yang menarik, bukan
Betul.
cuma knowledge ya, pengetahuan yang bisa menjadi referensi, tapi juga nanti kita akan bagi-bagi hadiah ya Mbak Ci, souvenir
Betul
ya.
sekali. Jadi di sesi Q&A tadi Mbak Wina, kita akan ada hadiah untuk 5 pertanyaan terbaik. Dan juga akan ada kuis ya Mbak Wina ya, betul ya.
Dan kuisnya juga ada hadiahnya.
Nah,
Waduh,
menarik
udah
sekali.
acaranya gratis, dapat poin gratis,
Luar
dapat
biasa.
hadiah luar
Tapi ada
biasa.
syaratnya ya Bu Wina dan Pak Putu ya.
Apa tuh
Jadi
syaratnya?
Syaratnya harus stay tune sampai selesai. Bener
Oke,
ya, Pak? Iya, luar biasa.
siap. Oke, tanpa bermaksud berpanjang lebar, Bapak Ibu, ladies and gentlemen, sahabat Apari sekalian, we now move to the welcoming and opening address, and we would like to first invite Mr. Bambang Suseno, Chairman of Apari, to present his remarks. Kepada Bapak Bambang, kami persilakan.
Bu Wina and Bu Cici for the time and introduction given to me. Oke, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera bagi kita semua. Pagi. Good morning, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Thank you to each and every one of you for being here today in the Trade Credit Insurance webinar, a collaborative event between Apari, Sompo, and Coface. Let me begin this opportunity by thanking God Almighty for all His blessings to us. And let me giving a warm welcome and appreciation to all parties who generously contributed to make this webinar come through. They are Eric Nimitz, CEO of Sompo Insurance Indonesia, and to all distinguished speakers, Tim Coface, they are Bernard Au, Chris Murphy, Brad Taylor, Beng Ho, Karen Ong, and also Tim Sompo, Ricky Natapraja. I think they are more than ready to share to us their expertise. Also, warm welcome to moderators who will guide this interesting webinar interestingly, and to all participants and viewers who have allocated their prime time this morning to join this event. Ladies and gentlemen, it is our pleasure for Apari to work together with Sompo Insurance and Coface for this event. And it is such an honor for me to speak on behalf of Apari. Apari has graduated 3,259 insurance and reinsurance brokers experts to date, of which around 90% are working in insurance and reinsurance brokerage firms. Apari applied CPD, so the title that members already hold must be maintained by updating and upskilling their knowledge through joining webinar like what they do today and like what Apari regularly do every Thursday. Okay, about the webinar today, we know that global pandemic COVID-19 includes Delta variants has triggered financial problems in business. So we would expect in today's webinar, we will need to learn about the problems and the way out. What type of risk that is faced by business in relation to trading on credit? What kind of challenges that many companies face? How will the economic outlook and risk look like? What type of risk that is growing nowadays? How is the country profile of Indonesia? How is the risk underwriting appetite? And many, many more. But for sure, we would learn how trade credit insurance will be the solution to safeguard the trade receivables. We believe that this session is a great session where the experts will share their valuable insights, thoughts, ideas, and knowledge. So I personally encourage to all participants to let's get benefits from them. Yeah, I think I will need to hand over to Eric Nimitz, who will give an opening remarks to all of you. So I would like to say once more on behalf of Apari, welcome. It is great to see so many of you here today, around 500 registered attendees, and we can expect double or even more viewers on YouTube within coming days. Ya, selamat bertemu itu say hi, selamat berpisah itu say bye, selamat mengikuti webinar TCI, semoga bermanfaat untuk semua. Enjoy the webinar, stay safe, healthy, and happy to every one of you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih Pak Bambang. Thank you very much for your welcoming and opening address.
Next, we would like to invite Mr. Eric Nimitz as President Director and CEO of Sompo Insurance Indonesia to present his opening remarks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Pak Bambang Suseno, for your inspiring opening. And good morning to you and your Apari executive management team. of course, also a good morning to all members of Apari and our esteemed partners at Coface. I would like to extend my very warm welcome to all of you, and thank you very much for taking the time to attending this event. Sompo is very proud to co-sponsor this event together with our reinsurance partner Coface. For us as Sompo, it is always important to serve our clients and our partners, and this event we also see as a chance to provide additional knowledge and additional information to all of you to promote your businesses. The topic of today's trade credit insurance webinar, Economic Outlook of Indonesia and Asia amid COVID-19, is of great significant meaning as we are starting to see positive indications of economic recovery in several key industries in Indonesia and Asia. Although the pandemic is still not yet over, unfortunately. Indonesia, one of the biggest economies in Southeast Asia and Asia itself, will be at the spotlight of global economic recovery process heading into 2022. Many other economies will be keen to resume trade relations with both Indonesia, but also the whole of Asia. How we manage trade and safeguard open account transactions will be, of course, a key element to support this growth of sales and allow Indonesian businesses to trade safely during this challenging transition period from the pandemic situation into a new normal business environment. There has not been a better time than now to further promote trade credit insurance solutions to companies and businesses in Indonesia, I believe. And we hope that the positive relations that Sompo has with the insurance brokers in Indonesia will continue to support this kind of development into a new normal. Furthermore, today marks a milestone event for Sompo and Coface as we will be launching our new trade credit insurance product with extensive ranges of options and services to build a tailor-made credit insurance solution. This new product will be a game changer in the market. I also would like to thank all insurance brokers for the great support in 2021 to our company. 80% of our TCI business currently comes from insurance brokers. That is a great achievement and a big support from your side. Thank you very much for that. We have experienced a growth in TCI of 170% versus the last year. And I think this is a clear indication that there is a huge need for TCI in Indonesia. Finally, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to the organizing committee for arranging this event, especially the team of Apari, our partners in Coface, and of course my colleagues in Sompo for the great collaboration and all the efforts to make this event happen. I hope that all the attendants will find the TCI webinar informative and beneficial for your professional and business development. And with that, I would like to finish today's opening and thank you very much. I wish you all the success for the event. Terima kasih and have a great event and a good day. Thank you.
For your opening remarks.
Ya, dan mungkin saya sampaikan sedikit poin-poin penting dari pesan-pesan dari Pak Erik dan Pak Bambang secara singkat ya.
Oke.
Jadi mungkin tadi Pak Bambang menyampaikan bahwa Apari sudah ada 3.000 expert lebih, dan ini 90% ya, lebih dari 90% member tergabung seluruhan dari insurance brokers ya. Dan ini juga kesempatan yang baik untuk para member belajar lebih dalam lagi terkait dengan belajar mengenai problem-problem yang ada di kondisi saat ini ya, terutama seperti apa sih tantangan-tantangan yang ada dengan webinar pada hari ini, dan resiko dari trade perdagangan sendiri itu apa, dan bagaimana risk underwriting juga bisa membantu ya para klien untuk bisa menjadi solusi. TCI sebagai solusi kepada para klien kita gitu ya. Kemudian kalau tadi Pak Erik menyampaikan bahwa momen ini memang pada saat memang masih ada COVID ya Pak Putu ya. Tapi ini momen yang paling penting untuk memperkenalkan TCI, terutama ada produk baru gitu ya. Momen yang penting karena sepertinya akan mulai lagi nih new normal ya.
I see.
Masuk lagi ke, mungkin kita berharap normal kembali, karena di Sompo Insurance sendiri TCI naik nih. Tadi Pak Erik menyampaikan 170% dari tahun lalu ya. Jadi ini menunjukkan bahwa antusias dari para klien juga cukup besar ya terhadap tantangan-tantangan ini. Jadi mungkin bisa lebih perdalam lagi dan bisa ditawarkan kepada para klien solusi-solusi dari TCI dengan produk baru nanti, yaitu Trade-liner.
Oke, I see. So,
Gitu.
TCI ini akan jadi game changer tadi disampaikan oleh
Betul
Pak Erik
sekali
ya.
Pak Putu. Jadi game changer yang akan bisa
Menjadi solusi lah ya.
Iya,
salah
karena
satu
ini
ya.
bisa tadi retail bisa tailor made gitu
Iya.
ya. Gitu ya.
Betul ya. Saya dengar juga begitu di beberapa literatur yang saya baca.
Betul, Pak.
Demand terhadap TCI itu menjadi semakin tinggi ya.
Betul, Pak Putu.
Dari tahun ke tahun gitu ya, apalagi sekarang sudah ada pandemi, saya dengar udah sekarang itu volumenya itu globally itu sekitar 10 triliun US dollar, jadi sangat banyak. Jadi,
Wow.
luar biasa.
Luar biasa.
Oke, jadi mudah-mudahan
Potensi.
acara pagi ini bisa menjadi berkah buat kita semua dan
Amin.
lagi-lagi menjadi referensi yang baik ya bagi kita semua.
Amin.
Baik, ladies and gentlemen, Bapak Ibu serta saudara-saudara sekalian sahabat Apari, we now come to the presentation sessions. First presentation will be delivered by Mr. Bernard Au as Regional Economist of Asia Pacific from Coface. His presentation will cover the recent economic outlook of Asia Pacific amid COVID-19. Good morning, welcome, Mr. Au. Now your turn. You have 20 minutes in this session to share your view on the recent economic outlook of Asia Pacific amid COVID-19. And now I hand the floor to you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I'm Bernard Au, economist for Asia Pacific at Coface, and I'm very happy today to share in this webinar hosted by Apari, co-organized by Sompo and Coface, on Coface views, economic views of the Asia Pacific region, with a focus on Indonesia in particular, and as well as the major risks that we see in the COVID area. So I think, as we approach the end of 2021, we have a better sense of how the economic recovery has progressed so far this year. And we also look forward to 2022. What are the outlook for the economy as well as the risks that we are seeing? But I think it's good to have a little bit of recap in what's happening in the third quarter of this year. So I think after the Delta variant surge in India in the second quarter
Excuse me,
of
sorry,
this year,
Mr. Au, could you please to make it your presentation in full slide? Slideshow mode, please.
Are you able to see the slideshow now?
Not yet.
So actually we cannot see you, Bernard, before. Sorry.
Let me share again.
Okay. Yeah, Mr. Bernard, you can continue your opening. Thank you.
Okay, so let's have just a brief look at the Delta variant hit to the economies in Asia Pacific during Q3. So we know that a lot of economies in this region has been hit hard by the Delta variant in the third quarter of this year, and this is in terms of the economic activity, the hit to the economic activity we can see from the PMI numbers for Q3. This is what you can see on the left-hand chart on this slide here, where you see the hit to manufacturing activity is quite severe, especially in the Southeast Asia region. You can see that in terms of what was the PMI performance in the past 3 quarters, it was progressing well, even above the 50 mark, which signifies expansion of manufacturing activity. But in Q3, we saw a severe hit. And we know that in terms of GDP recovery, if you look at the right-hand side chart, many economies in the region have went back or returned above the pre-pandemic level. You can see on the right-hand side the green bars, including Indonesia in the second quarter of this year. But as you see from the Delta variant hit, we are expecting there is a risk of GDP returning back below pre-pandemic region in the third quarter of this year. So what does this mean in terms of the full year 2021 GDP outlook? So we have maintained our global GDP forecast for 2021 at 5.6% growth, and we expect that growth momentum to moderate to 4.4% next year. And this is mainly because as economies around the world progress further to the new normal or trying to get back to normalized business activity region, that economic gain will start to fade off. So, but we are still seeing quite robust growth next year. 4.4% is still much better than what we have seen over the past 10 years or so. But when you look at a regional basis, there are differences in terms of the growth outlook. And for what has happened in Q3 in terms of the Delta variant, it has affected some of our forecasts for economies in the region. For example, we have downgraded the GDP forecast for a number of economies, including Japan, Australia, and in Southeast Asia, we downgraded the forecast for 4 of the countries, including Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Vietnam. So this is mainly because...
Excuse me, sorry for interrupting your presentation. Mr. Rao, could you please to stop share? So we are here that will be sharing the slide.
Okay, sure.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
Okay, you can continue your presentation, Mr. Rao.
Yeah, sure. Can you go to the next slide, please?
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, so we have downgraded a few of the economies in Southeast Asia, including Indonesia, and that is mainly as a result of the Delta variant hit to economic activity. But overall, what we are seeing is that the global recovery, including the regional recovery in Asia, remains intact. Perhaps not as strong a pace as we are expecting at the beginning of the year, but nonetheless, it's still progressing well. If you move on to the next slide. So just to give you a few, some new data coming from Coface. So every quarter we produce a quarterly publication showing the risk assessment of 162 economies around the world. And the latest Q3 publication known as the barometer shows that we have upgraded 26 markets around the world, and this is to reflect that we are continuing to see that global recovery intact. But also to put it into context, we have downgraded 78 economies at the height of the pandemic last year. So this is to show also a normalization of that, to show that economies around the world have starting to recover and will continue to recover next year. Next slide, please. So we also, next slide, please. Yeah. So we also have a risk assessment for 13 sectors across 28 countries. And the slides, the charts that you see here, the table, left side shows you the regional breakdown and right side shows you the Asia Pacific breakdown. Can you go back to the, yeah, this one? So this really shows you, that in terms of the global recovery is starting to broaden out. Because when we look at the Q2 barometer, which is just the previous quarter risk assessment, we have upgraded several of the sectors, but mainly concentrated in ICT as well as metals. But now we are seeing, more sectors across the 13 sectors that we cover starting to have upgrades. So this really shows you that the global recovery is progressing and also broadening out to include other sectors, especially those that are harder hit by the pandemic earlier last year, as well as the Delta variant this year. So if you move on to the next slide, please. So in terms of while we are expecting global recovery to remain, we still see major risks around, that could undermine the outlook for that recovery. So the first one that you can see here is really on the, or rather, despite that upgrade that I talked about earlier, we are still worried about the resurgence of new variants, especially variants that are resistant to the current vaccines that we have. So this is a key major risk that we will continue to watch out for, because this will seriously disrupt, the economic recovery that we have so far. A second concern or second risk is rising inflation. A third one is supply bottlenecks, and a fourth one is energy shortages. And we'll just briefly touch on each of this in turn. So rising inflation, while the emerging Asia inflationary pressure has been accumulating, it is still not as quick as what we saw in the Western economies, especially in the US and in the Eurozone. But nonetheless, because of some of the supply shock in terms of high commodity prices, it has started to push up some of that price pressure, especially the producer price pressure in Asia. So this will then, eat into some of the growth momentum that we are seeing so far. Next slide, please. So another major risk that we are seeing is the supply chain disruption that we are seeing now, and it seems to be worsening into the end of the year. So if you look at the left-hand side chart here, it shows you the PMI supplier delivery performance, which just shows you that, as the number gets further away from that 50 mark, it means that the supplier delivery times is getting longer and longer. And we are now seeing that, the purple line, the blue line, the green line is much lower compared to the other colors, the other lines. And this shows you that supplier disruption is quite severe in the Western economies. In Japan, it has continued to deteriorate, and this is mainly because of the automotive sectors. They are facing issues in terms of the semiconductor shortages, as well as shortages for other auto parts. So the question here now is whether we are going to see Asia, excluding Japan, the delivery supply chain starts to worsen. So whether we start to see delivery times getting longer and longer, because that will have a serious impact in terms of the trade flows in the region and the export performance in the region. And the last major risk that we're looking at is energy shortages, energy crisis. And I'm sure we have read about the energy issue in China in late August and in the month of September. And the energy crisis in China has really affected their industrial activity. And you can see from the right-hand side chart here, industrial activity has go into negative territory for some of the sectors, including crude steel, automotives, and rubber and plastics. For other sectors, you start to see slowing growth. So this really tells us that this is a major risk to watch for energy shortages. Next slide, please. So moving on to Indonesia. Let's start with the COVID situation here. The COVID situation has certainly improved from what we saw during the Delta variant surge in the third quarter of this year. So you can see on the top left-hand chart, both new cases numbers on the 7-day moving average basis, as well as the new death numbers has fallen quite sharply. If you look at the Google mobility data, it shows you that mobility trends have improved across Indonesia. If you look at the retail and recreation mobility data, it has actually recovered above the baseline number, which is early 2020 numbers. Although in Jakarta itself, it's still below, but it's showing an improving trend. But what is perhaps of a greater concern is in terms of vaccination rates. Even though Jakarta has achieved quite high vaccination rate, over 70% fully vaccinated, across the country, we are still seeing only about 25 vaccination rate, 25% of the population fully vaccinated. But what is also encouraging is that Indonesia has really ramped up its vaccination rate to about 2.5 million doses a day. So based on that number, if they continue to increase, then of course they will reach herd immunity, which is about 70% of population a lot quicker. But we are estimating about at least 6 or 7 months before Indonesia as a country reach that 70% mark. Next slide, please. So in terms of GDP performance, as I mentioned earlier in my presentation, Indonesia have returned to pre-pandemic level in the second quarter, but of course there is risk of it sliding back below in Q3. But what is driving that economic activity is strong export growth as well. We know that higher commodity price has benefited commodity exporters such as Indonesia. And if you look at the right-hand side chart here, you can see that the blue line, which represent exports, is much higher than imports numbers at the moment, ever since about late 2020. So this is really good in terms of providing an additional economic support for the GDP performance going forward. And in terms of export, what are the types of exports that is helping Indonesia have a stronger export performance? Next slide, please. So some of the key drivers for Indonesia exports are coal, food, chemicals, and palm oil. So palm oil has seen some slowdown in terms of the volume, in terms of the value, but we are seeing food rising steadily. We are seeing coal and chemicals seeing a pickup in the growth pace. Coal is mainly linked to the energy crisis in China as well as in India. So this will really be beneficial for the coal exporters in Indonesia. And what this strong export performance means for Indonesia is that we are seeing the trade surplus increasing, which you can see on the right-hand side chart here, the green bars. We can see that the trade surplus balance is really much higher than what we see in recent years. So this has really helped Indonesia current account surplus, so help Indonesia build a stronger external position. So in terms of what are the major export markets of Indonesia, if you go to the next slide, please. So compared to 2015 and 2020, China has become one of the largest export market for Indonesia at 20% of Indonesia export market, overtaking the US, which is at 11% if you look at the left-hand side chart. So the top 10 export markets for Indonesia represents about 2/3 of its total export market. And why I show you this is that, you know, the economic performance of these markets will, of course, affect the performance of Indonesia exports. But of course, if you look at different export types, you will see that different markets represent, you know, will be the top 3 markets for the different types of Indonesia exports. So if you look at the right-hand side table, you see that for palm oil, the top 3 markets is India, China, and Pakistan. But if you look at coal, it's still India, China, but the 3rd largest market is for Japan. So if you look further down at other major exports, is different markets. So all these markets' performance, their economic performance, their economic recovery is going to impact the demand for Indonesia exports in different categories. If you look at the, please go to the next slide. But what we saw, you know, I showed a little bit about the Q3 PMI numbers earlier, but what we saw also in Indonesia Q3 numbers, their economic indicators is that, you know, it's continuing to show some growth momentum weakness. If you look at the retail sales numbers, we have seen earlier the Google Mobility data showing some improvement, but in terms of retail sales, it's still, you know, in negative growth territory. So this, we are continuing to monitor this number. And in terms of PMI numbers, you see that Q3 PMI numbers, manufacturing PMI numbers for Indonesia is much lower than what we saw in previous quarters. And we again continue to see, you know, what's going on for the Q4 numbers. So far, October PMI numbers is encouraging, showing, you know, a recovery in the Q4 numbers. So that should help to boost up the full year growth. In terms of fiscal stimulus, Indonesia is trying to consolidate its fiscal position. So it's trying to reduce that budget deficit to get back to, you know, below 3% by 2023, because that is the year that they have allocated in terms of return to the fiscal rule that they have set for themselves. Next slide, please. Finally, in terms of monetary policy, we expect the Bank Indonesia to maintain its policy rate at 3.5% until at least the second half of next year. A major, you know, push to Indonesia to increase their interest rate will be, of course, the rate hike expectation in the US, as well as whether the rupiah exchange rate is volatile or not. And so far, the rupiah has maintained its stability at around 14,000 to 14,500 against the US dollar. So, but as we see, you know, countries around the world start to tighten their monetary policy in response to that increase in inflationary pressure, and in some cases increase to house prices, we will start to see Bank Indonesia facing increased pressure to also hike their interest rate. So this is also another risk to watch in terms of the recovery for Indonesia. And with that, I'm going to close my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the very insightful presentations, Mr. Au. And please allow me to highlight some key points, but let me do it in Bahasa to ensure a better understanding by all the audience. Oke, Bapak Ibu, teman-teman sekalian, dari apa yang sudah dipaparkan oleh Mr. Au, Mr. Bernard Au, ada beberapa hal penting yang disampaikan, yang itu sangat penting menjadi insight. Yang pertama adalah adanya outbreak virus Delta menyebabkan pelambatan aktivitas ekonomi. Memang terlihat dari indikator Production Manufacturing Index atau PMI di Q3 yang juga terjadi across the board ya di seluruh negara, memang ada perlambatan aktivitas ekonomi. Sebetulnya sebelum Delta outbreak disampaikan juga sudah ada beberapa negara maju sudah kembali ke level pertumbuhan seperti sebelum masa pandemi. Lalu hal lain yang disampaikan oleh Mr. Au adalah masih adanya risiko PDB di Q3 akan turun di bawah level sebelum pandemik yang sebelumnya sudah sempat naik. Hal lain adalah yang disampaikan oleh Mr. Au adalah kita semua harus mewaspadai adanya tren penurunan atau yang menjadi challenge. Yang pertama adalah adanya tren tekanan inflasi, kemudian ada supply bottleneck yang artinya tidak mampu memenuhi tuntutan karena perbaikan demand. Kemudian energy shortage juga tadi disampaikan, itu menjadi challenge, dan masih banyaknya resistensi dari masyarakat terhadap pemberian vaksin. Jadi ada 4 hal yang menjadi challenge. Kemudian tadi juga disampaikan di Cina ada kebijakan Go Green yang itu juga mempersulit produksi batu bara. Kemudian Indonesia, ketika masuk ke Indonesia disampaikan oleh Mr. Au, Indonesia membaik kasus COVID-nya, vaksin rate trennya itu naik, dan ini menjadi game changer sebetulnya ya. Makanya kita kenal sekarang dengan istilah economic of vaccine. Sudah ada peningkatan aktivitas ekonomi ditandai atau indikatornya ada dari Google Mobility, khususnya di sektor retail dan recreation seperti disampaikan oleh Mr. Au tadi. Kemudian di Q2 2021 ekonomi Indonesia sudah balik lagi ya ke level growth sebelum pandemik. Pendorongnya adalah karena ekspor Indonesia sudah membaik, dimotori oleh harga komoditas internasional yang sudah membaik, karena memang ekspor Indonesia banyak didominasi oleh sektor komoditas khususnya dari batu bara, minyak, CPO, dan chemical, dan impornya juga kemudian menjadi naik. Tetapi baiknya adalah karena ekspornya lebih tinggi dari impor, kita mengalami kondisi yang apa yang kita sebut sebagai trade balance surplus. Kemudian disampaikan mitra utama dagang Indonesia, khususnya Cina, Jepang, ASEAN, dan beberapa negara, itu total ekspornya itu mendominasi. Jadi 67% dari total ekspor Indonesia itu datangnya dari mitra utama dagang Indonesia seperti yang tadi saya sebutkan, Cina, US, Jepang, seperti yang dipaparkan oleh Mr. Au. Kemudian lebih jauh beliau juga memberikan paparan mengenai atau insight terkait dengan fiskal ya. Jadi disampaikan kemampuan pemerintah atau fiscal space kita itu terbatas, tapi bagusnya ada fiskal disiplin. Jadi pemerintah akan mengembalikan defisit fiskalnya itu ke angka 3%. Secara moneter terjaga suku bunga maupun nilai tukar, tapi yang menarik yang disampaikan di akhir presentasi Mr. Au tadi adalah bahwa akan tetap ada potensi atau risiko volatility karena kenaikan FFR atau Fed Fund Rate dari US. Artinya kalau inflasi tinggi, sektor tenaga kerja di US membaik, itu bisa akan memicu juga rate di Indonesia. Begitu kira-kira presentasi dan beberapa key points yang sudah saya sampaikan atas presentasi dari Mr. Bernard Au.
Okay. We move on to another important presentation on today's webinar. It's about risk underwriting outlook of trade markets for Indonesian companies by Mr. Brad Taylor, Vice President, Head of Risk Underwriting, Southeast Asia Coface, and continue by next presenter, Mr. Beng Ho, Senior Risk Underwriter, Asia Pacific Coface. Brett.
Selamat and good morning to everyone. It's great to see you all again. It's been a few years since I was in Indonesia, but a couple of years ago I was invited by Apari to speak in front of its members, and hopefully I got to meet a number of you. And I really look forward to being able to travel again sometime soon to reacquaint myself with you and meet new friends. I'm going to talk about some of the lessons learned from the global pandemic and post-COVID situation. I think post-COVID might be a little bit premature, as Eric said in his opening remarks. We're still not out of this, and there's still a long way to go. So I'm going to focus primarily on sort of the global perspective, together with the regional sort of outlook and view from risk underwriting. And then I'm going to hand over to Pak Beng, who will give a much more deeper dive into how we think about risk underwriting for buyers in Indonesia. So Coface, we are a truly global organization. You know, we were originally the French export credit agency, formed about 75 years ago in 1946. Whilst our headquarters remains in France, in Paris, we're no longer owned by the French government. We're publicly listed now. But we have a fantastic global network with, you know, 50 centers around the world, where we have analysts and risk underwriters based, which collect data and take risk decisions every day on buyers in their jurisdictions. We have more than 700 underwriters and credit analysts, serving more than 11,000 customers globally. On average, we take more than 10,000, that's right, 10,000 risk decisions every day. Which is just massive. You know, we have more than 200 million companies in our database, and we currently have trade receivables or support trade receivables in excess of 540 billion euros. Obviously, with all of the information that we gather, we also get updated information. Some of it's good and great. Sometimes it's not always so good. So we do receive adverse information, such as payment delays and overdues and claims, with around 500,000 of those coming through to us. But whilst we're global, we also think locally as well. You know, we have this concept of what we call close to risk. We like to be based in the jurisdiction where we can of the buyers and obviously our customers, the policyholders as well, so that, you know, we have that local knowledge, being able to understand how business is done in a particular country, you know, what are the local nuances that might exist. You know, how are financial statements prepared? Are they credible? Are they reliable? Are they available? All of those things help us to be able to understand the risks that we're being asked to take. You know, trade credit is an unsecured, basically an unsecured loan that, you know, suppliers extend to their buyers, to their customers, and we support that through, you know, having the information to understand the risks and obviously pivot and adjust. You know, how do we assess, you know, all of this? We obviously look at the relationship that exists between the seller, which is our policyholder, and their buyers. You know, for us, a lot of the risk starts with the policyholder and the seller itself, in terms of, you know, what industry are they in? You know, what sort of credit assessments do they do on their customers? How do they onboard their buyers? What sort of credit management processes do they have? And of course, we look at that again from the buyer's perspective, or what we call the debtor as well. So if I use the term buyer and debtor, I'm talking about the same party. Obviously, other aspects are very important. The country risk is critical. You know, the political risks that it can exist in one country can be different from the next, and obviously the sector in which the policyholder and its customers operate in. You know, there's always good buyers in, you know, bad sectors and bad buyers in good sectors. So it's always a generalization, but it's very important that we sort of understand, you know, what that sector is, what the dynamics are, and where does the buyer sort of sit within the sector. You know, are they a key participant and, you know, really have a reason to exist and can sort of have influence and over the direction of how that sector performs? Or are they just one of many and, you know, they're really just a price taker and they could potentially disappear tomorrow and, you know, no one would bat an eyelid, they would just be absorbed. So all of those things, you know, we take into consideration. Obviously, the legal environment is very, very important to understand, you know, when we see a claim and we have to enforce or collect against that, you know, what is the situation, you know, in being able to enforce as an unsecured trade creditor. So, and it does vary from country to country. And then, of course, we look at the debtor, the buyer itself, and its, you know, the payment behaviour and its financial position. You know, how long has it been in business? What does it do? Who is it owned by? Is it owned by some individuals? or is a part of a larger group, maybe a larger domestic group, or maybe a multinational, global multinational corporation. All of those things we sort of look at to understand the risk profile of that particular buyer. Obviously looking at, you know, the payment history, that if there is one, if it's an existing customer, and you know, the customer is now looking, our policyholder is now looking to ensure that. You know, we look at that trading history to understand the payment performance, which is very important because, you know, we also, whilst we're a financial institution and we assess risk, and to be really able to do that properly, we do need financial statements to the extent that we can get them. But, you know, they're always historical. You know, they could be a year old, 2 years old, depending upon what's available. Whereas the trading history is much more now. You know, it reflects the current position. So all of those things we take into consideration when we're sort of assessing the requests that we see from our customers and policyholders. The data that we look at, there's really not one particular thing. It's as you can see on this slide, there's a lot of different aspects that we need to consider and take into account when we're being asked to consider a credit limit on a buyer. You know, one of the first things we do is obviously we need to check to see that the buyer actually exists. You know, that's really important that you're selling to a company that is properly registered, because that's important for us when we, you know, if there is a problem, then we need to be able to collect on that. So we need to ensure that it has the proper registration, and you know, that's done by, we have various partners around the world that help us check the registries, confirm, you know, the company's registration or ID records, and make sure that we're giving you a credit limit, or giving our policyholders a credit limit on the buyer that they want and are selling to, which is really important that you've got cover on the right counterparty. You know, we consider the macroeconomic situation of each country, you know, the business climate, the political stability, all of those things are critical to make an assessment. Financials, I mentioned, clearly, you know, when you're extending trade credit, you're basically, as I say, providing an unsecured loan to your customers, and for us to be able to properly assess the risk of the buyer, we, you know, always try to get the financials. Obviously, if it's a publicly listed company, you know, there's plenty of information. They have their quarterly or half-yearly filings. Private companies in certain jurisdictions are still obligated to file their financial statements. In other jurisdictions, that regime does not exist. And, you know, we rely very heavily on our customers, the policyholder, to help us try and procure those financials so we can make the proper assessment. We talked about payment history. You know, does the buyer pay? They may not pay exactly on 30 days or 60 days, but, you know, we look at the consistency and how they perform over recent periods. You know, historical trends obviously are very important, looking at, you know, the situation there. And as I said, the balance sheet financial aspects are, you know, very important from an overall assessment point of view as well. You know, where we have information and we have some gaps, we may not have the latest financials, or we may have some questions. We do try to sort of, you know, have contact with the buyers. You know, we can reach out to them and attempt to form have a meeting. But often, you know, we do really rely on our policyholders, our customers, to help convene and facilitate our ability to do that. And that's, I think, particularly important, you know, where financial statements may not be available for whatever reason, but being able to speak to the management of the buyer, understand their business model, you know, where they sort of sit in the sector, as I said, that can really help us, I think, you know, form a view as to the creditworthiness of a particular buyer, and hopefully get to a decision that sort of meets our customers' expectations. Obviously, the last 18 months have been kind of crazy. unprecedented, really. And you know, I've been with Coface for 5 years. I was a banker for a long time before that. And you know, we've had crises in the past, but this was something new, and none of us really kind of knew how it was going to play out. You know, when it started in sort of the second quarter of last year, you know, and then sort of moved progressively around the world from east to west. You know, we had to continue to sort of monitor the situation. So the first thing we kind of did was we looked at, you know, the various industries that we thought would be hit the hardest, and the countries that were impacted at that point in time, because as I said, you know, the situation evolved and moved from sort of China and the, you know, the east through to the west. So you know, we looked at those sectors. You know, airlines obviously were basically out of business. People could not travel and didn't travel. Retail, hospitality were affected because people weren't able to go out because of social distancing. We looked at where, you know, huge numbers of infections were being reported, because that could have an impact on sort of the buyer's sort of position at that point and its ability to operate. So, you know, we took a very sort of, I guess, reasonable position. I think we certainly didn't panic, but we started to look and see where the risks were and decide how to deal with that. So then, in collaboration with our partners, the brokers I'm talking about here, we worked with you to try to understand, you know, what was important to the customer, our policyholder. You know, were they still trading themselves? Were they still making sales? Were they still able to collect from their customers? But, you know, obviously the sales that, you know, occurred from sort of 2Q last year, 3Q and sort of the rest of last year were significantly impacted, because a lot of businesses just, you know, weren't operating, or people were working from home, and you know, they didn't need deliveries, they didn't need their stock and production. Retailers weren't buying. So, you know, we looked at the situation on a really by buyer level, because not all buyers are the same, and we really tried to understand you know, how that buyer might be impacted. And, you know, with the collaboration of the customers through the brokers, we obviously tried to reduce and adjust our exposure to really be aligned to what the customer needed at that point in time and for the immediate future. You know, if they had a large credit limit, they weren't utilizing it at the time, they weren't going to be making any sort of significant sales. We did try to adjust that down along the way, because, you know, we were obviously looking to reduce and manage our exposure at that point in time as well, which was very critical for us as an organization. We saw a lot of requests for repayment plans and, you know, what we call extended due dates. Under the policies, you know, our customers can approve credit and extensions up to a certain period, but in many cases that wasn't enough. You know, the buyers were having liquidity issues. They were having trouble collecting from their customers, which meant they couldn't pay the policyholder. And, you know, we were very sympathetic. We fully understood the dilemma at the time, and it was certainly in our interest not to, you know, force a default and have a claim, because collecting it would be almost impossible. And so we really tried to work with our customers, agreed to extended payment terms and plans where it made sense to do that. And I think in almost every cases we did agree to that, and it made sense. And, you know, in most cases it worked out. The buyers were able to get back on their feet over time when the economies reopened and they started to do business once again. And so, you know, I think that peak of our sort of activity was sort of around the middle of, you know, last year going into the third quarter. I think, you know, whilst we've come a long way over the past 18 months and hopefully the worst is behind us, there continues to be a huge amount of uncertainty. You know, as Bernard said, there's new strains of of COVID coming out all the time, and, you know, the efficacy of the vaccinations, you know, is being challenged, and whether it remains appropriate. There still continues to be social distancing restrictions, travel restrictions, although we're starting to see some opening, which is fantastic, and let's hope that that continues unabated. You know, there's obviously challenges from an inflationary point of view. We've seen huge price increases in many commodities. Steel increased, oil, you know, is at a huge price. Obviously, there's, you know, the food sector as well has seen increased and robust demand, which has driven prices higher. There's a global chip shortage of semiconductor chips, which is impacting a number of sectors. Think of any sector that has electronic components in it, automobiles, your computer, your phone, all of those things are being adversely affected, and the supply chains are being hugely disrupted as a consequence of that. And then, of course, we've got shipping challenges. There's, you know, shortage of containers stuck at ports that can't be moved, and shipping and freight rates have increased significantly, adding to costs which can't always be passed on to the buyer. And so those have to be absorbed, and there's a point to where that can happen. So the recovery really remains uneven. You know, it's not the same across every country. It's, you know, there are bright spots, there are some green shoots, improvements in certain countries and sectors, but it's certainly not across the board. You know, I think consumer, anything to do with retail, you know, certainly bricks and mortar retail is still a bit soft. People are sort of, you know, have migrated to the online model, which is fantastic. And whether we'll go back, I'm not sure. But there's certainly a lot of, you know, disruptions to the sector and the shipping delays which have occurred. So I think all of these things, you know, continue to put pressure on companies and their liquidity. You know, coming out of 2020 into 2021, you know, a lot of companies survived because of government support schemes that existed around the world. And there were moratoriums that were also imposed by various governments, which prohibited and prevented, you know, companies from being forced into sort of insolvency or bankruptcy. So there was a protection period, and some of those continues, and others have been removed and released. But, you know, a lot of companies, you know, used their liquidity, they dried up their cash, they've had to borrow money. And so their financial position, you know, has changed. It's not the same as it was pre-pandemic. And, you know, we need to assess each of those on its merits and make decisions accordingly. What's very interesting, though, is I think where we are today, you know, from when this first started, as you can see, the graph there called acceptance rate, which is a measure of the limits that we approve against the credit limit that's requested by our customers. You know, obviously we try to approve every request, but sometimes that's not always possible. Obviously it depends on the profile of the buyer. You know, we may be able to approve it for the full amount, or it may not be able to be approved at all, or sometimes it's somewhere in between. You know, obviously some limit is better than no limit. And you can see that, you know, the evolution there with the arrow pointing up, you know, we're really now at the highest level that we've been in some time, and certainly, you know, levels in excess of where we sort of were pre-pandemic. We've now got acceptance rates at much higher levels. And that's reflected in our exposure as well. You can see there that, you know, we did reduce, this is for Asia Pacific, our region here. So we kind of started to sort of see some reductions in third quarter 2020 as our exposure was managed down with the assistance of our customers and through you, the brokers, to be able to do that. But as you can see, we've really, as our customers have emerged out of hibernation, as I like to call it, and are getting back to business, they're trying to catch up all those lost sales, and they're now asking for credit limits, often more than what they had before, or there's new buyers that they're looking to do business with. And all of that has meant that our credit exposure has increased significantly to well above the levels that we started before. So that's the end of my presentation. And I'm going to hand over to Ben after the introduction and back to the studio team. And Ben will be able to talk about Indonesia from his perspective. So thank you very much for listening.
Okay, thank you, Brett. Hi, everyone. My name is Bang. For the next 10 to 15 minutes, I will go through with you on how do we underwrite Indonesian buyer. Yeah. Let us start with this chart. Actually, this is continuing with what Brett has just shared. If you look at this chart, this is our Indonesia exposure from Q4 2019 to last quarter in 2021. We are focused on Indonesia exposure. It is in line with across Asia Pacific. But if you pay attention more closely, this exposure only have a significant reduction in Q3 and Q4. What happened in the time is that, if you remember, that Indonesia was a little bit behind in reporting credit COVID case compared to other Asian countries. President Jokowi only addressed the nation in March 2020, on which, at that time, that other countries have already reported thousands of cases. Then what we did was that we knew that this COVID-19 case will have a big impact to Indonesian economy, but we did not know what will be the magnitude of this COVID. Like Brett just mentioned, that we know that every buyer is different. They may have a good buyer in the bad sector in the bad time as well. So what we did, that we do the manual underwriting. We do a massive portfolio review, line by line, buyer per buyer. We did not do the general reduction. We did not pull off the credit life of Indonesia. So that's why that if you can see here in Q3 and Q4, our exposure in Indonesia has been reduced. But this not taking too long. By early this year, in Q1 2020, we have seen our portfolio in Indonesia actually back to the pre-pandemic level in 2019. The question is now, maybe you ask, is how that Coface is able to manage this critical situation in quite relatively short time, because as you we see that this portfolio, if you look at the Q3, actually we have increased our exposure by around 34%. What does it mean? This means that we are able to support our clients to acquire new business or to catch up with the sales that they have missed during the peak of pandemic. The question is, how do we manage to handle this situation despite the complexity of Indonesia? One of the main answer will be our underwriting strategy on Indonesia. We have a agile underwriting strategy to handle the complexity of Indonesia. If you look at this map alone, it is a different color on different island, but the way we look at it is that this is not a different color, but this is a colorful and beautiful Indonesia. We see the 17,000 island not only as a challenge for the operation logistic, but we will see this is the opportunity in 17,000 places. When we look at the 34 provinces of more than 500 cities, we don't see there is a 34 different autonomy daerah that we have to deal with. What we see is beyond of these challenges. We understand that Indonesia have a huge potential. Indonesia have huge opportunities, and in fact, Indonesia is one of the largest economies not only in the region but in the world. As we know that Indonesia will be taking over the G20 leadership from Italy by December this year. So from this perspective, when we look at the buyer, we underwrite, we review them based on their own merit, based on their own performance. The question is now, how do we really underwrite when we see or we face a lot of challenges in Indonesia? Indonesia, as we know, that we still see the lack of transparency. We still experience that the corporate governance is still very poor, and the Indonesia was still poorly rated in terms of ease of doing business index in 2019. Nevertheless, despite of these challenges, we know that the likelihood of to get information, both operation and financial information, is low. Despite of these facts, we do believe that it is not impossible. It is not easy, but it is not impossible. When we deal with the company who run business under toko or partnership, that the chances to get information is almost nil. But then what is the key for Coface when we handle or we look at this the risk of the buyer who have operate under toko or CFA? We in Coface, we operate as a one big team, as mentioned by Brett early on, that we have a very strong teams. Our analysts not only based in Jakarta, but we have a strong team that provide with all the data is needed in other countries as well. And when we go for the decision making on when to underwrite Indonesia buyer, actually it's the same like other countries when we look at the risk. There's three big components when we look at the risk. The first will be the macroeconomy, the political situation. As we heard from Bernard early on, his team will collect data from many resources, then they will analyze and update us in a regular basis. And our collection and recovery team will monitor the trend of the payment behavior in the different sector and the different countries as well. Now come to the more micro analysis when we look at the particular buyer assessment, and as mentioned by Brett, that the relationship is very important, and broker play a very important role in building the relationship between Coface and our clients, and between our client and their customer, which is the debtors, and at the end to link or to build a relationship between Coface and the buyers. By having a trust among us, we should be able to get the information needed for us to make a proper judgment on the company. So we can see more details which buyer is a good buyer, although that the sector might be bad, maybe the situation, the timing was not really right. But when we do have inside information by having a visit or call with the buyer, and also that we get more additional information from our customer, then we should be able to see beyond what we have see on the data. Let me give you the real case study that we have in Coface. This is one of the buyer that dealing in agri-food it is one of the largest producer in Indonesia. They are quite aggressive. They have a big plan and they want to grow. They've undertaken quite substantial capex. But you can imagine that during the COVID, then which strikes the not only Indonesia but all over the world, because this buyer actually it imports raw material from a different part of the world. And what we can see also from our side in that point of time, that the number of requests coming in on this buyer is also increased. It could be that some of the supplier which deal with them in previous time, that they are quite comfortable, they're confident, but after they see the COVID, which is create a lot of uncertainty, then they are looking for the protection from the credit insurance. So if we are just look at the figure alone, if we just look at the outlook of the sector, it is quite impossible for us to support this buyer. But what happened was that we are quite happy and proud that we managed to establish a very good relationship and communication thanks to our broker, who managed to set up a communication channel first with the prospects. From the prospect, we understand more detail on the products, more detail on the payment terms, for instance, and where the goods will be imported to, and what is the plan for the next, let's say, a month or 3 months, and so on. On the other hand, we are also able to get a direct contact with the top management of the buyer. I myself managed to talk to the CFO and the CEO of the company. From the this meeting, the call that we have with the buyer, we really have a better picture on the company, and we are being briefed on the plan. We are being briefed on the what is the outlook on the customer base and other critical information on which we are able to support this buyer. We are not only to agree the limit that what we has been asked, but in fact, by Q3 2020, our exposure on this buyer actually increased by 30%. What happened now, as Brett mentioned early on, that the pandemic is still not end yet. We still do a very close monitoring on this buyer. We still have a regular contact with them to get the trading experience, to get the updated management account from them. And of course, we monitor the commodity price because it's still rising and it's still very fluctuated. So this is just on one of the case that we can share with you. The key here, what I would like to emphasize is the support from broker to establish a relationship, establish a trust for us in Coface to get the information on the particular buyer, on the particular prospect, on which by having all the information needed, that we should be able to support our clients and the buyer as well. Okay, this is the end of my presentation. If you have any question, maybe you can raise after the webinar. I hand over the time to Ricky or to the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you. That is very comprehensive and very insightful presentation, Mr. Brett and Mr. Benko. Again, thank you very much. Please allow me to highlight some key points, but allow me to do it in bahasa Indonesia. Pemateri dua-duanya menyampaikan bahwa global pandemik memberikan banyak pelajaran, tantangan, dan global pandemik ini mengubah tatanan hidup manusia di seluruh dunia. Meskipun demikian, hal ini disikapi oleh Coface sebagai peluang. Bagi Coface, di mana sebagai global company dengan dukungan tenaga spesialis yang tersebar di 44 negara, selalu siap dan mampu menyesuaikan ritme mereka dengan kondisi yang ada dengan menerapkan filosofi close to the risk. Maksudnya adalah memperkaya local knowledge, menjalin hubungan baik, baik itu dengan broker atau dengan customer, memperbanyak informasi untuk memaksimalkan keputusan atas suatu risiko, seperti macroeconomic data, company identity data, financials, payment incident, historical trends, balance sheet analysis, dan data enhancements. Pada intinya, situasi yang sulit sebagai dampak pandemi COVID meningkatkan ketidakpastian sehingga membebani pertumbuhan secara global. Tetapi support itu selalu ada dan di-fine-tune cara mengakomodasikannya oleh Coface. Sementara Mr. Beng Ho memberikan penjelasan yang detail mengenai kondisi di Indonesia, di mana didapati terjadi peningkatan risiko dibandingkan dengan kondisi pre-crisis, sehingga cara pandang underwriter terhadap risk juga dituntut untuk menjadi lebih agile, untuk menghadapi kompleksitas dan tantangan yang ada di Indonesia, baik dari segi demografi, populasi, dan ekonomi. Salah satu tantangan yang ada, di mana tantangan ini sudah ada dari sejak pre sampai dengan post-pandemic, consistently maintain, adalah sehubungan dengan transparansi dalam mendapatkan data operasional atau data finansial dari suatu badan usaha, di mana sudah dapat dipastikan bahwa publicly listed company lebih mudah dan lebih transparan dalam hal ini. Kalau boleh saya quote, "It is not easy, but it is not impossible." Jadi Coface memiliki banyak cara to obtain the data. Hint yang lain adalah penentu decision process yang menjadi perhatian Coface itu lebih kepada business environment-nya, salah satunya politik dan economic performance, buyer assessment, di mana salah satunya juga ada fokus kepada financial health dan payment behavior. Kemudian yang terakhir itu adalah relationship between insured dan the debtors trading experience. Okay. The next presentation will put focus on trading on credit, which will be presented by Mr. Ricky Natapraja, Deputy Chief Sales Officer, Local Sales and Distribution, and Country Head of Trade Credit Insurance, Sompo Insurance Indonesia. And now I hand the floor to you.
Sedikit announcement kepada teman-teman, bagi teman-teman yang sudah mendengarkan pemaparan dan yang masih akan mendengarkan beberapa pemaparan nanti, silakan untuk menyiapkan pertanyaan dan kemudian mengirimkan pertanyaan-pertanyaan tersebut melalui Slido, di mana link Slido-nya sudah kita posting di chat box YouTube. Pastikan teman-teman bisa memberikan pertanyaan terbaik dan nanti akan ada hadiah ya bagi best questions atau pertanyaan-pertanyaan ya, 5 pertanyaan terbaik ya Mbak Cici ya. Oke, itu saja dari kami. Siapkan pertanyaan dan sekarang waktunya Om Ricky Natapraja. Monggo Om.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera, salam, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and all sahabat Apari. Welcome to the TCL webinar today. Very honored and pleased to be here in front of you all to deliver some insight on trading on credit and the risks faced by businesses. Most people are not aware, but accounts receivable is basically 40% or represents about 40% of a company's typical assets. Now, when you talk about assets of a company or trading on credit, a lot of questions come into mind. For example, how do I calculate or estimate the amount of risk that I can take on board, or how much credit I can give to my customers? How long can I give them in terms of timing? Or what do I need to do to protect against my receivables if my customers don't pay? What happens if they don't pay, and what is the impact on my liquidity? All these questions are always faced by businesses and companies going forward when they want to try to give credit terms. But what does it mean to trade on credit? Well, basically, in its simplest, credit is about time and the amount of money or the amount of sales that you are willing to give to your customers in terms of the products and the services you're giving. So again, trading on credit is about how much product and service you are willing to give to your customers and the time required or you're allowing them to pay you for the invoice. When we talk about trading on credit, earlier you heard some explanations from Bernard, from Brett and also Beng, and there's lots of risks involved and considerations that need to be taken on board. We need to have a look at this from the credit strength and also how to be credit smart about assessing how much credit we want to give to our customers. If we take this another step further and break it down, there are two types of risk. One is your macro or systemic risk, and with this we're looking at effectively things like the country risk of where your buyer is operating, whether they're operating domestically in Indonesia or abroad. We need to know, for example, with COVID right now, what is the impact on that industry sector? How is it going forward? Have they started to recover and resume trading as normal, or they're still slowly coming back online? In terms of the industry itself, how heavily impacted was the industry? Has it totally stopped? Is it any recovery positions coming back on board? What about the trade supply chain and the issues of logistics coming into Indonesia or even outgoing to the countries you're selling to? Looking at the micro level or the more specific business risks, this is where we need to understand the customer's ability to pay. Have they also been impacted to a certain level where they can't sell? There is no demand for the product. So structurally, if you look at the graph on the right-hand side there, if you break it down and then group it into the systemic and the more specific risks, it allows businesses to understand what they should be looking for and considering when they want to trade on credit terms. So I mentioned earlier that accounts receivables or invoices on open account represent about 40% of a company's asset. So ultimately what we're trying to do here is also protect the balance sheet of a company, right? So when we look at the graph on this slide, you can see that basically on a revenue structure and the balance sheet of a particular company, you have assets, you have buildings, machinery, you have inventory. But 40% is actually accounts receivables. Now, most people don't realize that accounts receivables is actually as good as cash. Now, what do I mean by that? If anybody's gone to a bank and applied for a loan, what does the bank ask for? They will normally ask for collateral or security, right? And most people either pledge fixed assets, a building, a factory, or even their house. But the thing is, the bank will not lend you 100% on the asset of that value. So if you had a property worth $1 million, the bank's not going to give you $1 million loan against that property. At best, between 70 to 80%. But with accounts receivable, those banks that can accept accounts receivables as collateral or security on the facility, they can actually lend up to 100% of the invoice value. So that's what we mean by accounts receivables is as good as cash. If we take this another step further, and we break down the 40% of accounts receivable. There are two parts here, right? There's the unsecured and there's the secured portion. And we also know that cash flow and short-term liquidity is the heart of every business. Now, definition of short-term liquidity is no longer 12 months or 18 months, especially since the pandemic was in between us since 2020. Now, short-term by definition is less than 6 months. So any company that can sustain its liquidity, its business continuity for at least 6 months continuously, they're the companies that will continue to survive post-pandemic as we go into the recovery transition period. Now, low cash liquidity is the trigger for delay payment. Any company that is struggling to maintain their commitments and obligations regularly on a month-to-month basis or even through to a 6 month period is going to struggle. And that's when you start to have the trigger for bad debts and delayed payments. If you break down that 40%, as I mentioned earlier, 60% of those ARs is unsecured, and the 40% is actually secured. But what do we mean by secured terms? let's say going forward, as you see here, the 40% of secured terms, it's normally secured by an instrument, or the customer will pay cash in advance for the goods or services, then the supplier or the seller will deliver the goods. The other alternatives are letter of credit, or in Indonesia we call that SKBDN, or a bank guarantee or other some sort of formal instrument. But nowadays, with the COVID pandemic, a lot of the banks have slowed down in giving facilities, whether it's cash or non-cash. So that provides another issue, a problem for the buyers that they want to buy the products from the suppliers. So the suppliers or the sellers have no choice but to sell on credit terms. Now, selling on credit terms has that element of risk which was previously discussed by our other speakers. So the 60% is actually 100% unsecured. So this is something to consider for businesses that want to sell on open account or trade terms. Now, if the customer doesn't pay or they start delaying their payments, this is the recipe for bad debt. Now, according to the Credit Research Management Center, a company will, within a year, experience 3 customers that will go bad. They'll either default or even go insolvent and go into receivership. So this is a statistic that people need to keep in mind when dealing on open credit terms. So when we want to trade on open account, we need to understand the trade flow. Okay? It's all about understanding how to balance income, the liquidity flows, and the time and the period that you're going to give to your customers. Okay? Again, I'll reiterate that trading on credit is about how much you want to give to your customers in terms of value in the sale and the time required to pay the invoice. Let's take a simple scenario. Let's say I'm a distributor or a trader and I want to sell my goods and services. I have about $1.2 million in working capital, which works out to be $100,000 a month, but that's already pre-allocated for operating expenses. I also have a bad debt reserve and cash surplus of about $120,000, about 10%, right? And some sufficient cash flow to support at least 60 days worth of operations and work processes. My supplier gives me 30 days credit term or $150,000 worth of credit to buy his product and then pay him within 30 days. I have customers that I sell to and I give them 60 days credit terms or 60 days to pay, and I give them $200,000 worth of credit. Now theoretically on paper that looks very profitable because I make $50,000 against $150,000 worth of supplies and other costs. Now I know my customer, he will pay normally within 30 days past due date. So that's my day sales outstanding. Now looking at the timeline here, under normal circumstances that will be great. Okay, then assuming that my customer pays me on time within 60 days, then my liquidity is normal. But what happens if my customer delays or he has an issue and he cannot pay me? That will mean that I will start to approach some critical cash liquidity period. I will enter the orange or the red zone, which means it will disrupt my operations, and also it will have an impact on my supplier, because my supplier on this example has only given me 30 days. Even if I paid him 30 days later, I would already be in default with my supplier. And if my buyer continues to delay and delay and delay, I'm going to be in serious default, but then I have to dig in and use the bad debt reserve to pay my suppliers. In this case, I only have $120,000 to pay my supplier, but my credit amount is $150,000. So I'm still not going to have enough to settle my dues with my supplier. So this is just to give you a bit of a visual impact of how to consider how much time and credit and the value of the sale you are going to extend to your customer. So it's really about balancing the amount of capital you have and the liquidity that you can sustain over a period of time, and that must match on the terms that your buyers will pay you back over a period of time. So because it's all about timing, it's all about how much time you are willing to wait to be paid. Now, funnily enough, there is some risk mitigation tools already in place, firstly outside of insurance. The Indonesian accounting standards has implemented a new PSAK, or what we call Pernyataan Standard Akuntansi Keuangan. Okay? Now this is number 71, which replaces number 55, which actually requires companies to reevaluate their risk, the credit that they give and the terms, to allocate the reserve before the credit is actually implemented, to make sure that they have an assessment on the risk default and to allocate in real terms the amount of money to cover the bad debt. So in essence, the difference between PSRK 55 and 71 is 55 says that you only need to reserve the amount of money after the risk or the loss has incurred, which really doesn't make sense, right? It's like saying, well, you have a building, you have a house, so if it burns down, then you find the money to rebuild. So what 71 does now is companies must have the allocation of reserve before you implement the credit facility or the credit terms or even the loan if you're a bank. So it means that you're implementing the credit risk bad debt reserve from the beginning. Let's put this into a more bigger context. That previous example was only for $100,000 or so in sales. But what if your customer or your business was a $10 million business? Okay, you have $10 million of credit sales annually. So if you put 10% aside, that's $1 million for bad debt reserve, right? So, and then you have a customer that fails to pay you. He's going bust. He's going insolvency and he owes you $500,000. Now that is a large quantum to understand. So what happens? You have to take $500,000 from your bad debt reserve. So this is your cost of risk. But of course, there's a more effective way to reduce your total cost of risk, and that is with trade credit insurance. Let's take that same scenario. Let's say we have a customer, okay, we have $500,000 worth of sales with him, and we cover $10 million of our insurable sales. Let's say the premium on trade credit insurance policy is 0.3%. We're in a good sector, good industry, performance is good. So effectively, I only have to pay $30,000 on $10 million turnover. So my cost of risk is no longer $1 million, it's $30,000 in premium. And if there was a bad debt situation, I make a claim against the policy and can get up to 90% compensation from the insurance company, which means cost in savings of risk and managing the risk much more better, which is basically reducing the total cost of risk. It's a no-brainer, ladies and gentlemen. So what is this trade credit insurance? I know my colleagues from Coface in the next session will discuss on this much further, but just to give you an overview and some insight, trade credit insurance is where the insurance company will protect your client as a seller or supplier against the sales that they make to the buyer on credit terms. So if the buyer is to default or go bankrupt, the insurance company will pay that claim or the outstanding amount to the insured policyholder or your seller client. In parallel, during the policy period, we will monitor the risks and we'll also support with any debt collection that may be required. Okay? So in summary, there are three main risks that is covered under a policy. One is insolvency atau kepailitan. Number two is protracted default. So that's where the customer hasn't gone bust. They're still operating, but they're just delaying the payments due to financial difficulties, or we call in Bahasa Indonesia, wan prestasi. And of course, the third one is political risk if there is export-related trade on the deal. So essentially, trade credit insurance is where the insurance company pays where your customer doesn't pay you. That's in its simplest form. So with that, I hope this has been insightful for all the broker members of Apari. The next part, I would like to just highlight a little bit on doing export business, right? So if you have a look at this particular slide, this is some data from the World Bank, right? You can download it from their site. If you did some export sales to these countries and one of the buyers was to go bust and you wanted to pursue legal processes in the country, if you look at China and India, it will take you more than a year and a half to wait for the decision of the court to impose the insolvency. And the recovery is very low, in most cases below 35%. What is it like for Indonesia? Indonesia is not much better for insolvency. It will take you 1 year in court if you want to pursue your invoice that has gone bust because the buyer has gone insolvent. And the recovery rate is only around 30%. So you have to wait a year to only get 30% of your money. Not very effective way, a very expensive way to get your money. So it's a no-brainer, as I said. TCI is the most effective and efficient way to protect against non-payment or insolvency of your buyers. So why is it that companies want to trade on open account or credit and even use credit insurance? Well, there are 6 main reasons. First is normally sales expansion. They may already have an existing customer database. They have loyal customers. They want to increase their credit limits. They want to extend more time to their buyers. That's part of the sales expansion strategy. Or it could be the seller wants to enter new markets. They want to explore new markets overseas. They don't have any contacts or references in the countries like Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, wherever it is they want to go. So that's where the insurance company adds value because of the database and information that we have to support analyzing the buyer and their creditworthiness. Thirdly, of course, is protection against bad debt and catastrophe losses in the event of insolvency. Another key point is better financing terms. As I mentioned earlier in my presentation, if you go to a bank and you want to get a trade facility, ARs are almost as good as cash. So the bank likes accounts receivables to be pledged, especially if they're covered by trade credit insurance, because it enhances the credit quality of the buyer and the risk. And then it frees up a lot of capital in bad debt reserve. And the final point is we add value by giving economic insight and provide outlooks on different sectors and different regions around the world. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed this insight on trading on credit. I'd like to introduce you the dedicated team of Sompo in Indonesia that handles trade credit insurance. We have February as our underwriter for TCI. We have Rudy and Maulana as our business development guys and insurance specialists handling TCI. And we also have 18 branches and marketing offices all over Indonesia, and in those branches we have a trade credit insurance specialist. Sompo has branches and offices from the Sumatera region through to central Indonesia, which covers Jabodetabek, West Java, and also Central Java, and also East Indonesia, which covers East Java, Bali, Sulawesi, Makassar, and also Kalimantan. So if you have any prospects or you have clients there and you'd like us to help you in servicing your clients within those regions, don't hesitate to contact Sompo. And please send all your TCI inquiries to tci-inquiry@sompo.co.id. We look forward to the pleasure of serving you. Thank you for your attention. Enjoy the rest of the webinar. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Ya, luar biasa. Sompo Insurance sudah sangat siap sekali untuk menjadi mitra para pialang dalam hal kredit insurance. Sekali lagi terima kasih atas presentasi yang disampaikan Pak Riki. Sangat mencerahkan dan membantu dalam memperluas sudut pandang mengenai trading on credit kepada potensial klien untuk lebih memahami risiko yang mereka hadapi dan cara terefektif untuk memitigasinya melalui trade credit insurance. Silakan Mbak Cici.
Ya, terima kasih Mbak Wina, dan selanjutnya kita akan masuk ke presentasi berikutnya, yaitu How Credit Insurance Can Help Your Customers. Jadi ini kita akan menyimak bagaimana cara-cara mendekati para klien ya. Dan ini akan dipersembahkan oleh Mr. Chris Murphy. He is the Regional Head of Mid Market and Partners Asia Pacific Coface. So, hello, Mr. Chris Murphy. Are you ready? Okay, so we're still waiting for Mr. Chris Murphy. If you're ready, so we'll.
Hello, hello, hello.
Okay, great. Okay, maybe we have a bumper for you, Mr. Chris. So please stand by. Okay. Okay, so Mr. Chris, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
That's great. So, okay, please. Okay, so we have. Yes, the place is yours, Chris. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that was Ricky and his sons playing the guitar intro. So thanks to him and his family. Thank you to everyone who's dialed in, and welcome. Selamat datang semuanya. Yokoso, willkommen, bienvenue. Welcome. Especially to our friends at Apari and Sompo. Also a big shout out to Krishna and Andres, our two local Indonesian TCI experts at Coface. Today I'll be talking about who Coface is and how TCI can help your clients, customers, also how to position it. Now I have 13 slides, but the good news is that I can wrap this up in about 13 minutes. So, or I can give the 130-minute version with in-depth stories, anecdotes, and examples. So which would you prefer, guys? Okay, I can feel the overwhelming power of prayer coming through my laptop screen and camera, telling me, please do the short version. No problemo. Let's get started. The good news is we're on a downhill run now, and I can rip through my slides super fast. So hopefully this works. Okay. How do I go? Next slide. Next, here we go. Okay. So I'm going to speak very slowly, as I know my New Zealand accent can be difficult to understand. I'll try and use my finest Shakespeare in the Park English voice. You've already heard a little bit about Coface from different speakers, but let me give you the tale of the tape. Coface has more than 50,000 clients worldwide, 1.5 billion euro in turnover last year, and on track to exceed that this year. More than 4,300 staff in 50 countries, covering more than 195 countries. Coface also has a Fitch rating of AA and a Moody's rating of A2. Next slide. Okay, so Coface has been in Indonesia since 2013, and we've been in a partnership with Sompo since 2018. Now, how the partnership works is quite straightforward. Sompo manages the negotiation with the broker or client. Sompo reviews the initial TCI proposal and the supporting documents to confirm that it meets with our terms and guidelines. If confirmed acceptable, Sompo will submit to Coface the proposed commercial terms. Then we can initiate the risk underwriting and assessment of the proposed insured buyers. Coface, as the lead reinsurer, performs the KYC and confirms that we can accept the terms. The contract is signed between Sompo and the client. The cover request will go to Sompo and then be relayed to Coface. Coface will raise the invoice for Sompo, who then invoice the broker and their client. Okay, so that's the process. Right. Okay, Ricky touched on what is trade credit insurance, and some of the other speakers have kind of talked about it before. So instead, I thought I'd focus about the impact of unpaid invoices on your client's business. Okay. So what is the impact of unpaid invoices? So here are some key stats from the Coface playbook. Now, some of this is quite scary stuff, and one of the reasons why now with COVID and all of the global economic uncertainty, trade credit insurance is the most important and one of the fastest growing lines of business insurance in the world. So just to give you a few of these numbers, 80% of companies globally are faced with defaults. 25% of corporate bankruptcies are linked to unpaid invoices. But what is the impact of an unpaid invoice? When we drill down into what happens when an invoice is unpaid, there's a specific table here that we have on the right that shows that even a small bad debt can impact your client's business. For example, if a company has an unpaid invoice of 10,000 US with a 10% operating margin, then this company needs to generate additional turnover of 100,000 US. So you can see there, you've got the unpaid invoice amounts on the right-hand side, and then the profit margin of 2%, 5%, or 10%, and then the additional revenue required to offset the loss. For some businesses right now coming out of the COVID pandemic, they're experiencing late payments and bad debts. So to all of a sudden have to generate an additional 1 million or 2 million, 5 million or 10 million in sales, they can get caught in a trap of having to drop their credit management standards by selling more to higher risk companies in higher risk countries. So what they end up doing is chasing their own tail, self-perpetuating more overdues and bad debts. I've seen it happen before across many different countries, and it can be a vicious spiral downwards. Okay, as I said, Ricky kind of touched on what is credit insurance. To summarize, when businesses are selling to other businesses on credit terms or trade credit, then a credit risk is created, and this credit risk can be insured. Typically, this is done on a whole of turnover basis or a single buyer basis or somewhere in between. Usually what happens when one-off single transactions are asked to be insured, there's a higher risk of not getting paid and a high concentration of risk to be covered by the insurer. So it can be more difficult to insure on a transactional basis. Instead, the buyers or customers of your client tend to be covered on an annual basis. So each transaction can be covered on a monthly credit limit or maximum exposure at any one time business. This also means that annual premiums for trade credit insurance are based on an estimated annual sales turnover with an actual turnover declaration at the end of the policy year. So I hope everyone's clear on how the customer cover works and how annual premiums work. But of course, we can address any specific questions in the Q&A section later on. Okay, so I'm going to talk very quickly about the 6 benefits. First of all, there I've got securing margins. As I showed in the previous slide, margins are crucial and must be protected because you have to generate a lot of additional sales if you are getting unpaid invoices and bad debts. Secondly, protecting receivables, aging, a debtor's ledger, an aged debtor trial balance, and accounts receivable, whatever you call it. It's absolutely crucial to a business's lifeline, as Ricky said. Thirdly, there we've got improving access to financing. Many banks love trade credit insurance as then they can lend more money to your clients with the comfort of knowing that one of the largest assets that a company has, their accounts receivable, is covered. Fourthly, strengthening credit processes. Trade credit insurance can help to fortify good disciplines of credit management. It's like a second or third opinion on credit decisions. Fifthly, optimizing cash flows. If claims occur, when a claim payment happens, you're getting quick replacement of working capital. And then finally, my favorite, which is facilitating higher levels of trade or growing your client's business with new debtors. I've had many examples over my career where that's happened. I probably haven't got the time to go into a specific story I was going to tell, but I've told it in previous webinars where, to give you the short version, we had for Coface back in New Zealand, we had a client that was a meat exporter. They had a limit of 500,000 on a US buyer. Oh, hello there. Someone got a Okay, carry on. Yeah, they had a limit of 500,000 and they wanted to grow to 10 million. Now, the buyer in the US was a family business. They didn't allow anyone, they didn't send out their financial accounts to anyone, but we were able to get a local Coface person in New Jersey in the US to go out and visit them. They were able to cite the financial accounts, and we were able to write the $10 million limit. And that obviously helped to facilitate higher levels of trade for our policyholder, who are still a policyholder now and are actually a Coface Global Solutions client now. So as I say, grow your client's business with new debtors and higher levels of trade. Okay, next slide. Right. So these are the kind of customers, I guess, excuse me, that should be looking at or have trade credit insurance in place. And we're talking about companies that are looking to strengthen their credit management. They plan to open up to new markets, whether it's domestically or overseas. They need financing, they're exporting. They've suffered from a bad debt or customer insolvency in the past. They have thin margins or a tight cash position. Let me give you an example. Logistics companies have very thin margins, so a lot of them have trade credit insurance. Or they're actually with one of our competitors. They may not be happy, and they may be looking for an alternate option. At the end of the day, any business selling to another business on credit terms should be interested in trade credit insurance. But these types of businesses should definitely be looking at trade credit insurance. Okay. Next slide. Right, these are some questions. So this is kind of getting into the area of the pitch. These are some questions that may help you, Apari brokers, with your clients. Firstly, do you have any concerns about getting paid on time? Or an even simpler question, have you had any bad debts? If they have and they lost money, you can get them talking about the pain of losing that money. I mean, I can remember, what money I gave to family members or friends from 20 or 30 years ago. They still owe me. It hurts. So get them talking about it and then explain how trade credit can help heal that pain, but can also stop it from happening again. Second question there, how do you manage your accounts receivable? Well, they either have trade credit with the competition, they have a factoring facility in place with their bank, or they're non-insured. I mean, as I said before, if they've got trade credit with the competition, we'd love to take a look at them to see if we can offer a better solution. If there's a factoring in place, we can help, trade credit can help to improve your terms. And if they're not insured or, they're just using in-house credit management, then I mean, now is the best time for them to be looking because of the uncertain times and the rising insolvencies. It's absolutely crucial to protect your cash flows from the threat of debt and non-payment. As I said, credit insurance is there for that quick replacement of working capital. Third question, do you sell overseas? Are you planning to expand to new markets or new product lines? Well, as I said before, in these turbulent times, if you're exporting to new markets or even customers that you've known for decades, you don't really know how COVID has affected them unless they're a publicly listed company releasing quarterly financial information. So there's a lot of economic uncertainty out there. Brett was talking about it before, and as well as Bernard. And TCI, Trade Credit Insurance, has a very strong way of offering comfort or peace of mind to companies who are concerned about getting paid on time or even getting paid at all. And then finally, if you've got a yes to one of those three questions, you've got a script there. Credit insurance can help you. We have a partnership with Sompo and Coface. For the next steps, I suggest making an appointment. The goal is to better understand your needs. It's all there, guys. Okay, next slide. Okay, some tips to overcome objections. I used to study drama at high school, so I'm gonna put on my best CFO kind of persona and character, financial controller. I don't need credit insurance. That's good to know, but you know that your debtors are doing well, but how well do you know them? Credit insurance provides you with a means to ensure you're trading with debtors that continue to have the ability to pay you. My partners always pay on time. Well, we've seen that debtors can suddenly go into insolvency without any warning. Their payments can remain on time right until the point of failure. For a small premium, you can have the peace of mind knowing that in an unlikely scenario, you'll be paid. I've heard about trade credit. It only covers low risk debtors. Well, credit insurance works on a risk averaging basis. As such, we're willing to take the risk on higher risk debtors because we're also covering the risk on lower risk debtors. So it's a whole portfolio perspective. I already have a factoring program. As I said, a credit insurance policy can enable greater flexibility, so better terms can be sorted out. And then finally, trade credit insurance is too expensive. Well, when you look at that previous slide where we're talking about even a small unpaid invoice, I mean, it's not that expensive. I've got a specific example to show you guys a real life case study. At the end of the day, trade credit, it can be far less expensive than the painful alternatives, which is non-payment, customer insolvency, or outsourcing to third parties. Okay, next slide. So I'm not going to go into the step-by-step sales process. It's all there. But, it could take 2 to 3 meetings to get a contract signed. I think the key is, working closely with Sompo, working closely with Coface, as I said before, with the process. So, yeah, it's all there. Next slide, which is also the step-by-step process. This is what I'd call a hot button pitch with yes or no answers. I'm not going to go through every box, but I did want to say one thing. I think now it's a tremendous potential in Indonesia. We're talking about a market that hopefully after COVID, when it dies down, will return to being one of the fastest growing economies in the world. We had Beng before saying, it's the largest economy in Southeast Asia, the 15th largest economy in the world by nominal GDP, 7th largest in GDP per capita. An economy estimated at 40 billion in 2019. I'm talking about the specific internet economy of 40 billion in 2019. It's expected to grow to 130 billion by 2025. And pre-COVID growth was accelerating at between 4 to 6% in recent years. I've been reading up a bit about Indonesia in the last few months. Indonesia is predicted to be the 4th largest economy in the world by 2045. Also by 2045, Indonesia will have a population of, I think it's 310 million people, economic growth of between 5 to 6% and a GDP of 9.1 trillion. Okay, so there's tremendous opportunity for growth here. We're talking palm oil, petrochemicals, electronics, transportation, machinery, telecommunications, food processing, the wood industry, textiles, footwear, consumer goods, integrated circuits, medical equipment, optical devices, paper, handicrafts, chemicals, rubber, pharmaceuticals, financial services, seafood, smelting, and God willing, tourism. So if you've got clients in those sectors and those industries, please talk to them about trade credit insurance. So as I said, now is a great time for Apari members to be targeting your clients and prospects, planting the seed by asking a few basic questions. For example, do you want to grow sales and protect your business against bad debts? I mean, who would say no to that? Also, when the claims start coming in, like I think they will in 2022, you've had a lot of government protection for businesses around the year that is slowly being unplugged. When those claims start rolling in, then premium rates will start going up across the board for all trade credit players, for all trade credit insurers. So I believe firmly that now is the time to get TCI cover in place. Okay, my final slide coming up. Hopefully I haven't been going on for too long. We've got a business case. The events depicted in this business case, I'll give you the law and order intro. It took place in Malaysia in 2019 in the textiles industry. At the request of our policyholder, the real policyholder name has been changed to Company A. The name of the overdue customer or buyer has been changed to debtor. Out of respect for our policyholder and the customer involved, the rest of the story has been told exactly as it occurred. So to give you the short version, Company A, sales of 10 million US per year, payment terms of 90 days, they're in textiles, the premium was 45,000, the claim submitted to us on the debtor was 2.5 million US. Okay, there was a 90% indemnity with no deductible. So the estimated indemnity was 2.25 million, which means the total loss for Company A, our policyholder, was only 250,000 when the claim was paid. Now, the total loss without trade credit insurance would have been at least 2.5 million plus legal fees, plus having to generate all those additional sales. You can see the timeline there. August 2018 to Jan 2019, the goods were sold and delivered. The invoices were due between November and April. By July, October, they'd only collected 10% of the debt. Then Coface paid a claim of 2.25 million, and that was less than 6 months since Company A reported to us. Meanwhile, the collection agency continued to collect because this company didn't actually go out of business. Okay, so as of now, it's been 2.8 years since we were notified, 2.1 years since we'd paid. So as you can see, that quick replacement of working capital, they would have had a catastrophic loss for their business. They were only a 10 million US business. Okay, so 2.5 million would have been huge. Could have even led to their own insolvency. But that's a good case for us. Okay, so that's my section. Thank you to Apari and Sompo for your patience and your attention. And now we're definitely on the final lap. I think Karen Ong is going to talk briefly about our new policy offering called TradeLiner. So terima kasih to Chichi, Putu, and Weena and everyone. And hopefully we can talk later in the Q&A session. Thank you very much.
Terima kasih banyak Mr. Chris Murphy. Thank you very much. Such presentasinya cukup insightful, menyenangkan ya karena singkat dan padat dan menjelaskan cara-cara menjual dari TCI itu sendiri. Jadi kalau boleh saya sedikit summary dalam bahasa Indonesia ya Pak Putu ya dan Mbak Wina. Jadi tadi Pak Chris menyampaikan bahwa apa sih definisi dari trade credit insurance tersebut. Kalau sahabat Apari menyimak bahwa trade credit adalah business to business agreement. Jadi perjanjian bisnis ke bisnis di mana pelanggan dapat membeli satu barang on account without paying cash up front. Jadi nggak perlu bayar di depan dan dapat membayar supplier at a later scheduled date. Jadi bisa dibayar di belakang. Nah, kejadiannya ternyata di 80% perusahaan-perusahaan ini banyak menghadapi default ya, banyak yang menghadapi bangkrut gitu ya, atau tidak bisa membayar, dan 25% corporate bangkrut karena link to unpaid invoice, jadi invoice yang tidak terbayar. Jadi ini data nih ya, dan pada rata-rata satu bisnis itu kehilangan 3 customer karena financial distress, tekanan keuangan, dan ketidakmampuan pembayaran, administrasi, atau menerima bisnis ya di setiap tahunnya in the given year. Jadi ini salah satu yang perlu diperhatikan bagi rekan-rekan sahabat Apari karena ini sepertinya memang karena Indonesia tadi seperti Chris mention bahwa di tahun 2035 nanti Indonesia akan menjadi negara terbesar keempat dunia loh Pak. Yeah. Diprediksi. Dan setelah COVID selesai, Indonesia juga akan menjadi kekuatan ekonomi paling disorot di Asia Tenggara. Dan itu industrinya banyak banget ya Pak, dari mulai manufacturing, kesehatan, transportasi, semua lini industri itu Indonesia akan sangat-sangat berkembang. Sehingga tentunya trade credit insurance akan sangat dibutuhkan. Tadi juga di Pak Chris juga menyampaikan tips-tips cara menjual ya.
Nah, itu dia
Nah,
yang
cara
trik-trik
ya.
how to handling the objection from
Iya, cara menangani penolakan dari para
Iya.
klien atau customer ya. Oh saya nggak perlu gitu kan. Loh, bisa digali gitu ya. Mungkin nanti slide-nya bisa diberikan pada para peserta.
Yeah.
Jadi mungkin bisa dipelajari lebih jauh lagi. Dan kemudian tadi juga ada case bisnis ya, cukup penting yang kita tadi simak saat barangnya dihantar kepada klien, ternyata tidak ada pembayaran, hanya 10% gitu ya.
Yeah.
Kemudian di tahun 2019 Coface membayar, dan pada sampai saat ini 2,8 bulan ya, 2 tahun lebih 8 bulan itu masih ditagih tuh dan masih berjalan tuh hutangnya. Jadi fungsinya dari trade credit insurance di sini adalah tentunya company yang tadinya tight banget karena nggak dibayar itu jadinya lebih lega sedikit lah ya, bisa meneruskan bisnisnya kembali. Jadi itu adalah manfaat dari TCA itu sendiri sih Pak Putu dan Mbak Wina. Oke, baik, kalau gitu kita langsung saja ke presentasi dari Miss Karen Ong. Dan Miss Karen Ong ini adalah presentasi terakhir pada webinar kita pada hari ini. Jadi rekan-rekan silakan disimak karena ini akan Miss Karen Ong akan akan menjelaskan trade liner yang menjadi game changer di trade credit insurance dengan judul Introduction and Launch of Trade Liner Coface and Sompo New Trade Credit Insurance Solution by Karen Ong, Regional CGS Account Manager Asia Pacific Coface.
And I'm pleased today to share with you our new trade liner wording, and it's ready to be launched in Indonesia. Improved wording, and actually many asked why is there a need to revise the wording. So the main reason are business environment, clients' requirements change over time. So we also need to ensure that we adapt our wording to meet the current situation. So what's great about this new trade liner wording? 4 points. Number 1, there's more transparency. Number 2, we have also included a new definition so that the contract is easier to understand. Number 3, the structure is much more simplified and easier to read. And lastly, the trade credit liner policy allows customization and is tailor-made according to the client's requirement. So that's are the 4 key points. Now I'll show you a general outlook of how the contract structure is like. On the left-hand side, you can see that general terms, which comprises from cover to definition. This is the, now we'll move on to the special terms, which shows the parameters and the features that is catered to the client's request. We also have these options, and they can be added on depending on the client's request to enhance the coverage that they need. Now, the trade liner policy also extends some additional services for our client. Firstly, we have this debt collection services to help our clients to recover the debts that are not paid by their buyers. We also have our Coface platform, which allows our client to submit their limit requests, submit the claims, or to submit their sales declaration. So this all-in-one platform is very user-friendly and easy to navigate. So from the right-hand side, Chris has briefly touched on, which I will just go through very quickly, how what are the criteria for the trade credit policy to be eligible? So firstly, it has to be a B2B transaction, insurable turnover more than 5 million, minimum of at least 6 buyers to be covered. And of course, we are covering the non-payment default risk of the receivables. So as much as we would like to cover all risks, there are a few exclusions that are not covered under the scope of the policy. We'll just name a few into this session. Firstly, you can see that the disputed debts are not covered. So it could be a case whereby the product quality is not in line with what has been agreed between the seller and the buyer has refused to cover and make payment. So in this case, it's very important to ensure that the debts are agreed by the buyer in order that the debt is covered and qualified under the trade credit insurance policy. Some other exclusion includes intercompany sales, terrorism, debts owed by a private individual, by a government, or any breach of law due to regulation are not covered by the policy as well. So what happens if our clients wish to cover those excluded? So we have a few options that the client can choose, which includes like natural disaster, political event cover, pre-shim, etc. So based on our experience, some of the more commonly options that our client will choose will be this natural disasters option, political event cover, maybe pre-shipment or binding order. So that's why I mentioned earlier that the trade credit insurance policy, TradeLiner is very customizable, that is tailor-made to the client's specific requirements. So now let me walk you through the journey from the time the policy is being signed and until the claim is being made. So at the start, at inception, client will have a list of the buyer list with them that is covered by us. So the trade credit insurance policy is unlike other policy insurance product. There will be many ongoing discussions between the client and the insurer. So that could be a discussion about increasing the limit amount, questioning whether the new buyer can be supported or not. So from our end, we will conduct regular monitoring on the buyers to ensure that their creditworthiness and also to update our clients if we know that the buyer is already in the rate. And in the event of non-payment of debt, our clients can submit the claim request via the Coface and provide us with all the supporting documents. With that, we will be able to start our debt collection action by contacting the client through phone calls or through emails. If the buyer is not responsive, we will then proceed to engage our local debt collection agency to visit the buyer at their premises. Of course, we will actually leave the legal action to the last resort. So here is just to show you that what a TradeLiner is regarding a risk attaching policy. So in this particular diagram here, you can see that we only cover deliveries that are made during the insurance period. So if the delivery is made before or after the insurance period, these deliveries are not covered by the contract. So what do we define? How do we define the cover? So the cover will start when the delivery is made to the buyer, and it will cease when the debt is being paid by the buyer, because there is no more outstanding amount. So lastly, just to wrap up, these are the benefits of TradeLiner compared to our competition. Firstly, this TradeLiner policy is very easy to manage, very easy to read and understand. We have only one claim notification process, which is via the Coface, a very simplified pricing structure, 1.5% for insolvency and 4.5% for other losses. And our economist has provided us with regular updates and publication in our website, and it's free to be downloaded. So to wrap up, TradeLiner is the solution for our client to grow their business while we protect their receivables. Thank you.
Ms. Karang Ong, for your quick presentation and introduction of what is a TradeLiner. Jadi rekan-rekan sahabat Apari, kalau tadi menyimak dengan seksama, tentunya rekan-rekan dapat mengambil secara detail, agak detail, dan secara garis besar bedanya apa nih trade credit insurance yang sebelumnya dan ada produk baru di TradeLiner ini. Jadi kalau boleh saya summary sedikit, di paling belakang dari presentasi Ms. Karang Ong itu menyebutkan bahwa keuntungan utama bagi para klien kita adalah polisnya akan sangat lebih mudah untuk di-manage karena lebih simplify dibandingkan dari yang sebelumnya cukup heavy kontrak ya. Jadi lebih mudah. Kemudian untuk klaim juga sekarang lebih mudah lagi karena akan ada proses satu notifikasi terpusat. Tadinya ada multiple claim notification, sekarang hanya satu ya digabungkan. Kemudian secara collection, simplified pricing structure. Jadi ada 2 fees, tadi ada detailnya. Sebelumnya itu sangat cukup kompleks ya untuk fees-nya, sampai ada 6 fee yang berbeda. Nah, untuk add-ons-nya juga ada economic studies yang artinya ada materi-materi yang bisa dipakai untuk menganalisa ekonomi situasi, dan ini adalah free. Dan sebelumnya itu akan sebelumnya adalah dia ada mandatory atau yearly charge economic studies or different. Jadi saat sebelumnya itu ada charge, sekarang sudah free nih Pak Putu. Jadi itu adalah
solusi
produk TradeLiner yang menjadi game changer nih.
Yang menjadi game changer dari solusi ya.
Betul. Jadi sahabat Apari mungkin bisa langsung cari, tadi kan sudah dikasih tips ya, cara mencari saat ini momen terbaik karena sudah akan bangkit kembali setelah COVID. Jadi dicari klien yang kira-kira butuh, memang butuh ya.
Memang demand-nya pasti tinggi,
betul,
berdasarkan tren kan.
Dan sudah ada solusi baru nih dari Trade Credit Insurance yang dipersembahkan oleh Sompo Insurance dan Coface. Baik, silakan Pak Putu.
So now we are moving to the next agenda. What is it? Apa kemudian acara berikutnya, Mbak Wina, Mbak Cici?
Best TCI.
Nah, ini yang paling seru nih. Jadi mungkin sebelum kita masuk Q&A, kita ada satu penghargaan Ada penghargaan yang memang kita sudah setting sebelumnya dari Sompo Insurance bersama dengan Coface. Ini adalah penghargaan yang kami berikan kepada perusahaan-perusahaan yang berhasil menjadi top producer di tahun 2020.
Ini particularly award untuk broker ya?
Betul, sahabat-sahabat Apari pasti yang di sini
siap-siap
perusahaannya ada yang mendapatkan nih.
Siap-siap di
mungkin ada
para audiens di rumah yang kerja di ini sebagian besar kan pasti kerja di pialang kan, siap-siap aja kalau namanya banyak-banyak doa deh, mudah-mudahan namanya nanti disebut sebagai pemenang.
Sepertinya udah tahu sih Pak Putu ya.
Udah tahu. I see.
Ya. Jadi ini adalah Best Trade Credit Insurance Broker Award, dan kami di sini sudah ada, mungkin sudah hadir Bapak Erikson. Halo, Bapak Erikson.
Selamat pagi semuanya.
Selamat pagi, Bapak. Apa kabarnya, Pak Erikson?
Baik. Pendengarannya suara saya ya.
Jelas sekali, Pak Erikson. Terima kasih sudah bergabung. Pak Erikson, jadi kita hari ini akan memberikan award ya, Pak, kepada Best Broker yang punya produksi terbesar di tahun 2020. Silakan Pak Erikson mempersembahkan awarding pertama kepada siapa, Pak? Silakan diumumkan.
Baik, terima kasih Cici. Ya. To my colleagues at Coface, so allow me to speak in bahasa ya, because most the participant in is Indonesian. Oke. Selamat pagi untuk Pak Bambang Suseno sebagai Ketua Apari dan seluruh pengurus Apari dan seluruh profesional broker tim ya dari member Apari. Pertama, terima kasih atas kesempatan ini. Sekarang saya akan memberikan penghargaan untuk the highest total producer di atas 2 miliar untuk trade credit insurance di 2020. Kita tahu bahwa tahun 2020 itu mulainya COVID ya, di Indonesia itu mulai kita rasakan itu di Maret, dan saya pikir terus masih berlangsung sampai saat ini, dan kalau kita lihat sudah semakin membaik, mudah-mudahan getting improve ya. Nah, tapi kalau kita lihat TCI di masa pandemik di tahun 2020 adalah suatu bisnis yang quite challenging, baik dari segi resikonya karena memang mulai terasa resesi ekonomi, dan kemudian juga dari segi pendananya ya. Jadi artinya orang cenderung untuk untuk saving cost ya. Namun demikian, meski quite challenging, kami sangat mengapresiasi achievement dari kerjasama dari teman-teman broker, dan utamanya untuk saat ini kami mau memberikan penghargaan untuk broker yang mencapai GWP di atas 2 miliar untuk TCI di tahun 2020. Nah, ini penghargaan ini itu jatuh ke tangan PT Mars Indonesia. Kami sangat berterima kasih untuk supportnya, dan kedepannya kami juga mengharapkan support yang lebih khusus untuk trade credit ini, karena saya pikir trade credit ini sangat dibutuhkan oleh partner-partner kita. Dan sekali lagi terima kasih untuk teman-teman seluruh broker. Kami mengharapkan kerjasama yang lebih ke depan, utamanya untuk trade credit insurance. Sekali lagi selamat untuk Mars Indonesia.
Ya, selamat untuk Mars Indonesia sebagai Best TCI Awards. Berikut adalah testimoni.
We're delighted to receive this award from Sompo Insurance as Sompo's #1 trade credit insurance broker. It was a fantastic year in 2020. It's been another good year in 2021, and I look forward to another great year in 2022 and beyond. Thank you, Sompo, for the collaboration. Thank you for the partnership, and look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you so much. We're really delighted.
Ya, silakan sedikit.
Terima kasih Pak Erikson atas pengumuman, dan selamat untuk PT Mars Indonesia yang telah berhasil mendapatkan Best TCI Awards ya, Broker Awards 2020. Baik, Mbak Wina, kita juga ada satu lagi ya, pemenang ya. Mungkin Mbak Wina bisa menyampaikan.
Oke. Pemenang berikutnya kita akan panggil. Pemenang berikutnya adalah untuk pengumuman pemenang berikutnya akan disampaikan oleh Ibu Yolanda Wijaya sebagai Chief Sales Officer Sompo Insurance Indonesia. Kepada Ibu Yolanda.
Ya, terima kasih. Selamat pagi semuanya. Good morning, Mr. Bambang Suseno and all Apari Executive Management and Professional members. As Pak Erickson mentioned that TCI is a challenging product to propose to a client, but this insurance broker company was successful in securing a very large account in 2020 with a premium above 1 billion rupiah. So today I'm very honored to present this award in recognition for total GWP above 1 billion rupiah in 2020 for single account for TCI product to PT Aeon Indonesia. Congratulations and thank you for all your continuous support to us. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum, selamat siang, ibu-ibu dan bapa-bapa. This is a proud moment and award for myself, our specialty FSPG team and all of PT Aeon. We are grateful to Sompo Indonesia and Sompo Trade Credit team for considering PT Aeon for this Best Achievement Award. Our success is not possible without your continuous support in this hard market and also during these difficult trading conditions for our trade credit clients. Again, terima kasih for this award. We are truly honoured to receive and we look forward to working with Sompo on many more opportunities into the future. Terima kasih.
Thank you.
Thank you Ibu Yolanda atas
Thank you, Cici.
mengumumkan menjadi pemenang ya berikutnya ya PT Aeon Indonesia.
Selamat kepada Aeon. Ya, congratulations to Aeon Indonesia. Bapak Ibu, saudara-saudara sekalian, sahabat Apari, kita sudah menyimak presentasi dari para speaker, kemudian tadi juga sudah ada seremoni pemberian award kepada broker terbaik ya di Trade Credit Insurance. Sebelum kita masuk ke agenda berikutnya, yaitu question and answer atau panel discussions, kita akan break dulu sekitar kurang lebih 3 menit ya. 3 menit ya, betul ya Om Adit? Ya, oke. 3 menit kita break. Silakan Bapak Ibu teman-teman kalau mau ke belakang, mau ngambil-ngambil kopi, minuman, silakan. Kita break. After 3 menit, we'll be right back. Okay, Bapak Ibu, saudara-saudara, sahabat Apari, now we are open the panel discussion, question and answer session after we have concluded our presentation sessions. To all guys, the speakers from Coface, please be ready. Are you still on and stand by? Halo?
Sepertinya masih standby ya, Pak Putri.
Masih standby ya? Ya, mudah-mudahan ya, standby. Okay, we have many questions from the audience, but karena banyaknya pertanyaan, kita nggak akan bisa jawab seluruh pertanyaan. Kita akan pilih, dan yang akan kita pilih untuk dijawab oleh the speakers adalah pertanyaan-pertanyaan yang memang memberikan identitas atau nama, begitu ya. Teman-teman panitia, apakah sudah bisa ditayangkan pertanyaan-pertanyaannya?
Yang merah nih sepertinya ya.
Oke, yang pertama, oke, ini ditujukan ke siapa nih ya? Yang pertanyaannya ini dari Pak siapa nih?
Indar.
Pak Indar Atmojo. Ya, ini ditujukannya. Oke. What's Coface's advantage compared to toko sebelah? Wah, ini siapa nih orang Coface yang bisa jawab?
Oke.
Ada filmnya sih Pak, toko sebelah. Cek toko sebelah.
Oke.
Tapi ini
Yeah.
mungkin.
Okay.
Okay.
Is there any?
Okay, I think I'll translate this for our colleagues in Coface. The question has come, what is the advantages of Coface differentiates Coface with other competitors? Would somebody from Coface like to take that question?
Yeah, I can probably take that one, Ricky.
Thanks, Chris.
Is Chris here? Can everyone see me, hear me? Yes?
Yeah.
Oh, lucky you. Okay. Coface, in relation to the competition, you know, it may sound cliched, it may sound cheesy, but, you know, our mission is for trade. Our shared culture values are client focus, expertise, collaboration, courage and accountability. We've got the largest trade credit footprint in the world. Okay, we're in a lot of countries that some of our competitors are not. We also have a point of difference. We specialize in business information. We also sell that. So we like to think that we're better informed than the competition. Another one of our key drivers is that we're the most agile trade credit underwriter. I've got to be honest, I've worked for 2 other trade credit underwriters in Asia Pacific, and I'd like to think that it's also the quality of the people. So in Krishna and Andres and the team in Indonesia, we've got some great local staff that are very client focused, you know, very customer focused, very broker focused. They're well supported by our regional and group teams. So, you know, in my experience, it's always the people and culture that make the difference, and that comes through in everything that we do. You know, I could keep going. We've got very strong systems, IT, good marketing, communication. You know, it's very simple, which I think is great. Anyone can complicate trade credit, but if you can simplify it, then that's the key. That's what the smart people do. And I think that's something that we do. We have great collaboration internally within our teams. As I said, we've got great access to Paris to get a lot of those big decisions made. And as I've said to everyone that I've had calls with in Indonesia, you know, let's write some business.
Yeah, just to add also to Chris there, I've also previously worked with some other TCI underwriters, different colour of course, but just to add that, you know, working with Coface has been a very fruitful and very exciting relationship, and for our brokers in Indonesia, through the partnership between Sompo and Coface, the risk appetite is a lot more broad. We are here to support. We will look at risks and we'll provide as much support as we can each deal, the technical expertise of Coface, and combine that with Sompo's dedicated TCI team. I think that's where the advantage is. We're not a post office underwriter, we have fully serviced teams, so I think that's where you'll see the added value that we can give to you as a broker and your clients.
Okay.
Yeah, you beat me to it, Ricky. The other thing I was going to say is obviously our partnership with Sompo, which is really good. In my 20-odd years of insurance, it's one of the best partnerships that I've ever been in, so if not the best. So, sorry to get the last say, Ricky. I know you're a last say freak.
Thanks, mate.
Oke, thank you, Ricky. Kita ke pertanyaan berikutnya mungkin ya. Oke, mungkin Bu Cici bisa.
Ya, boleh. Ini dari Yanis Muda Arianto. Betul ya? Yanis Muda Arianto, what is Coface doing if any bad debt from buyer if we have given insurance for them, and how to calculate credit limit buyer in Coface? So this is maybe
Yeah, I think we can give this to the risk underwriter.
Risk underwriter, maybe.
Beng, are you there?
Yeah, Mr. Beng Ho.
Hi, yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, can you show the
again?
question?
Repeat the
because
question.
I can
Okay, we
only
will
hear
show you
that
the
how to
question.
establish the credit limit. I can't read the
Oh, you
question.
cannot read?
Okay.
Okay. So,
Yeah.
What is Coface doing if any bad debt from buyer if you have given insurance for them, and how to calculate credit limit buyer in Coface? So this could be that a buyer may already have a bad debt and maybe currently insured. Would Coface be still interested to write a limit if we can keep it simple?
Oh, so I guess the question is that the buyer actually has a default to the supplier, right? And then there's a request to cover this buyer. I think this is the question, right?
Yeah.
So for this one, if you want to have a very straightforward, the very straightforward is no. Why? Very simple. Because if they have a bad debt, it means that they have a very severe cash flow. But again, we have to look at it, the more details, right? Because we have to see what is the reason of the non-payment, because it could be some dispute and it could be other reasons. And of course, we have to again, if you remember that how do we assess the buyer? There's a few components. The financial health is just one of the things that we look at it. So we have to look at the whole picture of the buyer. Yeah, but again, if it is a real cash flow problem, we might not be able to support, but we are happy to look more details on the buyer. It still depends the case by case basis. I hope I answered these questions.
Yeah, I think it's quite clear ya, Pak Ricky ya. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, next question is coming from Mbak Wina. Could you please to?
Okay, I think this is the same question still.
Ada next.
Okay. Next question, not from the
Anonymous?
not from the anonymous.
Ada
Okay.
lagi mungkin pertanyaan.
Ada yang lain?
Berikutnya, ya.
Di atas.
Apakah ada yang sudah ada bernama mungkin?
Pertanyaan dengan nama.
Pertanyaan dengan nama ada? Yang lain?
Kalau anonimus nanti kita susah kasih hadiahnya.
Oh, kita ditampung oleh kami nanti hadiahnya.
Pertanyaannya banyak tapi tidak ada namanya. Nah ini.
Ya, oke. Dari Pak Bambang. Apakah ini Pak Bambang Suseno atau Bambang yang lain?
Banyak, 1000 Bambang di Indonesia.
Oke, pertanyaannya adalah, how big the current portfolio of Coface in Indonesia?
Okay.
Okay.
Chris, I think this is another one for you, mate.
Thanks for the question, guys. Gee, I'm not sure what I'm allowed to disclose or not disclose. All I can say is that it is healthy and it is growing. Again, largely due to our partnership with Sompo. So off the top of my head, it's probably better for someone like Krishna or Andres to answer this specifically. But as I touched on before, one of my key directives in my role is to get more business out of Indonesia. So we need to grow it even more, and I think we can, based on what Bernard was saying, and some of those stats that Beng was saying as well about the size and scale of Indonesia. all of the sectors that I mentioned before that we can write business in. I mean, you're going to get tough sectors like textiles, oil and things like that, power. But that doesn't mean we can't write business in those in those sectors. We'll take a look at it. So without getting into specific, the book is strong and it's growing.
Thanks, Chris.
That's a politician's answer.
Very diplomatic.
Okay, thank you. Next questions, please, panitia. Kita cari lagi ya pertanyaan yang lain. Nah, ini.
Ada tuh paling bawah, Pak Putu. Ya.
Dari Pak Rizahan ya. Okay. The question is, can Sompo accept TCI business through inward facultative by doing joint underwriting? So, who should answer this question?
I think I'll
Okay.
answer
Oh, Ricky. Okay, ambil aja.
Silakan Pak Ricky.
At this point, again, this is rather confidential, but we have exclusive reinsurance agreements in place. So we have to look at each case, if it is facultative inward, on a case-by-case basis, because we need to consult, of course, with Coface if we can write it in a particular way. Given our current arrangements, this is something that we have to discuss further. I know it's not a yes or no answer, but if it's something worth reviewing, we'll take a look at it. I think that's another diplomatic answer for our brokers.
Okay. Many diplomats in Sompo.
Dan di seluruh Indonesia.
Dan di seluruh Indonesia. Okay. Is there any more questions? Yeah, from the audience, okay? Siapa lagi?
Ada Pak Tony
Krismanto.
Oke, Mbak Wina.
Pertanyaan dari Pak Tony Krismanto. What is the meaning of buyers and how many buyers minimum for trade credit insurance?
Okay, Tony, this one I think I'll try to keep it simple. The buyer is the party or the company that's buying the goods or service from the seller. So they're the ones who are going to be insured under the policy as the insured buyer. The policy holder is actually the seller or the supplier that's selling the goods or services to the buyer. Now, the buyer itself, the end part of the question, can you put it back up again?
Coba balik lagi ke slide-nya, panitia.
Boleh dikembalikan lagi?
Ya.
Right, the minimum buyers for any trade credit insurance policy, as Karen mentioned earlier, was 6. Okay, so we need to have at least 6 buyers insured on the policy before we can accept a policy for the supplier. Okay, so 6 minimum, and the buyer is the one that's going to be the risk insured under the policy. Hope that answers your question, Tony.
Can I just add though that in special circumstances we can also look at single buyer. Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, guys. And if there are less than 6, we can still take a look at it and see what we can do. It's a guideline, but I know that there are some companies out there that maybe only have 3 customers, and it could be Coke, Pepsi, and Schweppes. So we'll take them. Yeah, just wanted to add that in. Thanks, Ricky.
Thanks, Matt. Okay, next question.
Oke, pertanyaan berikutnya.
Masih ada ya, Pak?
Oke, masih ada kah?
Apa sudah 5 tadi ya?
Baru 4 kayaknya deh.
Yeah.
Satu lagi mungkin ya.
Karen.
Pak Budi Hermawan.
For Karen.
Pak Budi Hermawan.
Pak Jos
Itu ada Pak Jos Hidayat juga. Silakan Bu Cici.
Oke, baik. Pertanyaan dari Bapak Jos Hidayat. Assuming Coface has agreed to settle the claim, how do you get the recovery from debtors? Do you have any dedicated debt collectors team, lawyer for that? Thank you. Ya, Pak Riki, mungkin siapa yang bisa menjawab dari
Yeah, thank you, Pak Josh. I think Brett, are you on the line?
Mr. Brett, are you still on the line?
Yes, I'm here. Hello.
Okay.
Would you like to take this question?
I'll do my best. I think it was about debt collection, right? So
Yeah, after paying the claim.
After paying the claim?
Yes.
Well, obviously, before we get to the point of paying a claim, there's obviously a claims waiting period, and during that time, there's usually dialogues that take place with the with both the seller, the policyholder, and the buyer as well, where there's a default. So, there's a delinquency that happens, and, obviously in the first instance, we liaise with the policyholder to try to understand the facts and circumstances from their point. And then we'll try and talk to the buyer and understand the position from their side. And sometimes those positions don't always align. It could simply be a dispute. Maybe the quality of the goods wasn't up to specification or what the buyer was expecting to receive. But if it is truly a claim and there's a default because of insolvency or what we call protracted default, where the buyer doesn't pay because they can't, but there's no dispute. It's a process of, as I say, contacting the buyer, sending them emails, letters, calling them where we can, and then where we get to that point where those negotiations don't come to fruition or result in a sort of, we try and work out a repayment plan if that works for the buyer, to give them sufficient time to clear the debt if that's possible, and that can go over a many year period if it's substantial, or it could be a much shorter period. And ultimately though, if those negotiations break down, we then do engage a licensed and authorized collection partner in Indonesia to help collect that debt from the buyer. And of course that would involve lawyers being engaged, and ultimately it might either go to court or arbitration, and could end up in the liquidation of the buyer itself. So it really depends on the circumstances and the overall amount that could be involved that will determine how that might end up trying to be collected. But of course, if it's a legitimate claim and there's no dispute, we'll pay the policyholder within the claims waiting period that's specified under the policy, and then we'll continue to try to collect and recover that amount from the debtor. Thanks.
Thank you, Brett. Hope that answers the question for Pak Josh Hidayat.
Thank you, Mr. Brett, and I think that's the last question ya, Pak Putu dan Pak Riki ya.
Oke. Sebelum diakhiri, I have a question from me actually untuk for Bernard. Bernard, are you still there?
Mr. Bernard, are you still there?
Hello.
I think Bernard has left for another meeting.
Oh, okay then.
Yeah, sorry, Bernard can't be here. He had to go to another event.
Yeah.
Okay then. So, Bapak Ibu, saudara-saudara sekalian, so we have concluded our panel discussion or question and answer sessions. Yeah, thank you very much for all the audience who has raised the question, and also to all the speaker that has answered all the questions.
Ya, dan Pak Putu,
comprehensively and briefly.
Yang tadi sudah kita bacakan akan mendapatkan hadiah.
Oh ya, oke, siapa yang mendapat hadiah dari 5?
Yang tadi kita bacakan semuanya dapat.
Oh semuanya langsung dapat.
Iya.
Oke, lima-limanya ya.
Silakan untuk menghubungi panitia ya.
Iya.
Ya, bisa
Sekretariat
di atau
Apari.
bisa di chat ya, pemenang untuk alamat pengiriman ya.
Yes.
Ya, terima kasih.
Selamat.
Oke, selamat untuk kepada para penanya yang mendapatkan hadiah. Sekarang kita
Hadiahnya ada tuh Pak.
Yes,
Oke.
hadiahnya adalah
Apa-apa?
terima kasih kepada partner kami dari Coface. Ada souvenir menarik dan cantik yang akan dikirim kepada Bapak Ibu yang tadi pertanyaannya dibaca oleh kami.
Ya,
Terima kasih.
Oke, thank you Coface. Thank you. Oke, sekarang kita setelah tadi kita sudah dengarkan presentasi yang insightful begitu ya dari para panelis atau dari speakers, kita udah bagi-bagi hadiah di panel discussion juga tadi ya, ada TCI Broker Award juga tadi udah. Nah, sekarang saatnya kita tutup acara dengan kuis ya. Ada kuis, nah ini kuis bagi-bagian ya.
Nanti kita kontak. Lu jawab lewat slide ya.
Oke, sekarang kita masuk ke acara kuis. Bapak Ibu teman-teman sahabat Apari yang masih ada di depan monitor, sekarang saatnya untuk meraih hadiah dari fun quiz yang akan sebentar lagi kita sampaikan. Jadi pertanyaannya ini akan disampaikan melalui Slido ya, Mbak
betul,
Cici ya.
Betul, Pak.
Jadi nanti silakan cepat-cepatan ya.
Siapkan jempol dan jari. Ya, kita
Oke,
break dulu.
Ngopi-ngopi dulu.
Sebentar,
Break dulu.
ya, sebelum
Oke, kita harus ngopi-ngopi dulu ya.
Ya.
Siap, kita break dulu selama kurang lebih 5 menit. Jadi Bapak, Ibu, teman-teman sahabat Apari silakan untuk buka-buka buku, baca-baca internet, siapa tahu nanti jawabannya
Lihat-lihat
keluar dari
slide
sana
presentasi
ya.
yang tadi.
Presentasi yang tadi, betul ya Mbak Wina. Ya, oke 5 menit kita akan kembali. See you. Dah. Oke, thank you, terima kasih Bapak, Ibu, Saudara, teman-teman, sahabat Apari. Kita thank you sekali lagi karena masih stay tune, masih setia di acara ini, di channel ini. Jadi seperti yang disampaikan, segera kita akan lakukan ya launch quiz yang akan dilakukan melalui Slido. Jadi nanti Bapak, Ibu, teman-teman sekalian, sahabat Apari diminta untuk menjawab pertanyaan secepat mungkin. Pertanyaan yang benar nanti akan dapat poin dan akan diakumulasikan. Siapa yang tercepat, yang terbenar juga, nah itu nanti yang akan jadi juara. Juaranya akan kita ambil 5 ya, Pak Riki. 4 ya? Ada 4 dan kemudian nanti hadiahnya oke lah ya, bagus-bagus ya.
Souvenir dari Sompo dan Coface.
Oh, dari Coface. Diambilnya di mana nanti? Di Polda Metro Jaya? Enggak, bukan.
Akan dikirimkan ke rumah masing-masing.
Ke rumah masing-masing, siap. Oke, Om Adit, teman-teman panitia, kita langsung launch ya.
Nah, udah keluar nih, Pak.
Oke.
Jadi jangan lupa untuk joinmyquiz.com. Ya, jangan lupa rekan-rekan masuk ini di quizzes ya. Nah, ini ada enter game code-nya 664821. Ya. Jadi kita masuk dulu joinmyquiz.com. Jadi rekan-rekan sahabat Apari masuk dulu, ketik di browsernya di Safari atau di Chrome atau di Mozilla.
Masuk ke browser dulu ya.
Masuk ke browser dulu, joinmyquiz.com. Kemudian setelah itu masukin enter game code-nya
664821.
Betul sekali.
Oke, kita tunggu.
Ya.
Sudah ada pergerakan, teman-teman? Sudah ada berapa? Sudah banyak. Sudah ada 980. Wih, jadi 1500 yang masuk. Banyak ya. Ayo, jangan sampai ketinggalan.
Kita start dulu. Ya. Jadi jangan lupa masukkan di browser.
Masih kita tunggu ya.
Joinmyquiz.com ya Pak Putu dan Pak Riki, dan jangan lupa enter game code-nya. Ya, sekali lagi 664821. Nah, sudah ada Pak Yanis muda.
Oh ya.
Menang ya.
Oh, ini Pak Yanis nih, ini apa namanya? Haus hadiah nih kayaknya. Tadi udah dapat Pak Yanis, sekarang ikut lagi. Thank you anyway Pak Yanis.
Udah gitu dapat sertifikat ya Pak
ya. Dapat juga sertifikat, dapat souvenir. Kurang apa coba? Kalau datang ke sini kita kasih aku apa? Dapat juga Pak. Oke, udah semakin banyak. Oke, ada Angga.
Pak Angga juga.
Oke, siapa lagi? Ayo masuk. Ayo ditunggu.
Indar Atmojo.
Hadiahnya, oke.
Silakan jangan lupa untuk sahabat Apari ketik di browsernya joinmyquiz.com, kemudian masukkan enter game code-nya ya 664821. Nah, ini sudah berhasil nih.
Oh ya, udah
sedikit ya.
Ya, ayo masuk lagi. Sudah beberapa, masih kita tunggu. Ya, hadiahnya oke gitu ya.
Nah, sudah bertambah.
Oke, hadiahnya bagi yang laki-laki nanti bisa makan bareng dengan Bu Cici atau Bu Wina, silakan pilih yang bagi yang setengah laki setengah perempuan dengan Pak Riki.
Makasih banyak Pak Putu. Terima kasih.
Baik, masih kita tunggu.
Ya. Nah, sudah bergabung kembali, ada beberapa nih.
Ya, masih kita tunggu.
Ya. Oh nih, Pak Rizahan tadi juga berhasil mendapatkan best question nih.
Oke.
Terima kasih Pak Rizahan, juga haus hadiah ya.
Iya, masih banyak yang haus ya. Ayo pastikan masuk ke browsernya, kemudian ketik joinmyquiz.com, lalu masukkan game code-nya 664821.
Iya.
Ya, 664821.
Ayo baru sedikit nih. Karena kalau sedikit nggak seru ya.
Enggak seru.
Iya, semakin banyak biar paling cepat dan paling benar.
Iya, ayo. Pertanyaannya mudah.
Mudah?
Jawabnya susah.
Itu tuh Pak.
Iya. Pertanyaannya pasti seputar tadi ya pasti ya. Mbak Wina, Mbak Cici, Pak Riki ya pasti seputar presentasi tadi. Atau jangan-jangan seputar Sumpah Pemuda kali ya, ada nggak?
Enggak.
Hari ini hari Sumpah Pemuda ya.
Tahun berapa loh?
Itu tahun berapa ya? Tahun 28 ya, Cindi Lapang.
Wah. Tahun 1928 Pak Putu sedang di mana Pak?
Wah, waktu itu saya masih ada di mana ya? Masih ada di awan.
Apalagi saya Pak.
Di mana, di atas awan?
Di atas awan Pak, masih belum dibentuk ya.
Oke. Mulai?
Sudah ada.
Oke.
Oh, sudah bisa dimulai? Sudah ada.
Iya, masih terus bertambah nih, masih bertambah.
Sambil jalan.
Kita tunggu lagi ya. 1 menit lagi kita tunggu. Kita tunggu 1 menit lagi.
Yuk yang masih standby di YouTube.
Itu ada yang namanya keren tuh, curiga. Ih, siapa curiga?
Auriga, Pak.
Oh, Auriga, curiga.
Itu kecamatannya,
sorry,
Pak.
Sorry.
Betul.
Ini kan angkatan 28, Sumpah Pemuda. Bisa lihat.
Jadi bergabung ya Pak C sama gitu ya.
Iya, jadinya curiga. Saya baca Auriga ternyata.
Ya jangan lupa rekan-rekan yang masih standby di YouTube, masukin ketik joinmycourse.com di browsernya, kemudian masukkan enter game code-nya 664821. Jadi nanti rekan-rekan langsung terrecord nih, masuk set namanya siapa gitu kan. Habis itu kita akan mulai kurang lebih mungkin 30 detik lagi kita akan mulai. Nah, sudah bertambah lagi nih ya.
Iya.
Wih, makin banyak.
30, 29, 28, Oktober 1928, kami bangsa Indonesia, pemuda-pemudi bertanah air satu gitu ya?
Bertanah air Indonesia, ya betul Pak. Betul sekali.
Oke, siap. Sudah bisa. Ya.
Oke, baik, kita akan mulai.
Siap, oke. Pertanyaan pertama.
Tahun berapa Sompo bermitra dengan Coface?
Waduh,
tahun berapa?
Waduh, berat nih.
Ayo, masih ada 20 detik lagi. Ayo.
Wah, ini sudah hampir.
Sudah banyak yang menjawab.
Ya.
Wah, oke. Ayo masih yang belum menjawab. Ayo. Kalau nggak bisa menjawab, bisa googling.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, dan jawabannya adalah
Time's up.
udah keluar langsung nggak sih jawabannya? Oh,
jawaban
leaderboard ya.
Wah.
Oh, siapa?
Wow.
Oh, Ibu Asti, pemimpin. Nah, jadi yang menjawab benar ada 9, ya kan?
Ya.
Selebihnya salah tuh yang merah-merah, ya. Aduh, ada yang jawab tahunnya berapa? Yang benar tahun berapa?
2018.
18. Oke. Next question.
Apa manfaat daripada trade liner?
Manfaat daripada trade liner.
Ini materi dari Miss Karen Ong tadi kalau teman-teman menyimak ya di akhir presentasi. Jadi benefit dari trade liner. Nah, apa sih tadi disebutin tuh pembedaannya ya dari yang lama ke yang baru gitu ya.
I see.
Nah, silakan. Wah, udah hampir setengahnya nih sudah menjawab.
3, 2, 1.
Pemenangnya adalah.
Oke, kita lihat leaderboardnya siapa? Masih Asti. Oh, kemudian ada Jaya Kim, 10 yang menjawab benar. Jawabannya adalah
semua yang
di atas.
Benar.
Oh, semua di atas benar. Oke.
Centang semua tuh, Pak.
Siap. Oke. Next questions.
Pertanggungan berlaku untuk hutang yang timbul dari pengiriman. Jenis risiko apa ya ini?
What type of contracts are these?
Jenis kontrak apa ini ya?
Jenis kontrak apa ini?
Oke. Baru 3 pertanyaan, kita lihat apakah klasmennya akan berubah. Tadi adalah Asti yang paling atas, apakah ada yang digeser?
1000 pertanyaan ya Pak ya?
Ada 1000 pertanyaan, ya sampai pagi banget. Ya,
Time's up.
Tereng.
Apakah masih Asti?
Ini Asti lagi, Asti dan Jaya Kim nih, Asti dan Jaya Kim. Oke. Benar, 7 orang menjawab dengan jawaban yang benar adalah
risk
attaching.
I see. Oke, lanjut.
Terakhir nih.
Pertanyaan terakhir.
Apa manfaat utama dari asuransi kredit perdagangan?
Manfaatnya adalah, jadi kalau saya punya bisnis, saya harus bisnisnya bisa ambil trade kredit untuk melindungi perdagangan ya.
apalagi kalau kita jualnya dengan memberikan piutang, terms and condition. Jadi nggak tunai di depan, tapi kasih jatuh tempo 30 hari, 60 hari. Nah, itu resiko pembayaran di situ.
Betul Pak. Jadi perlu perlindungan ya di masa-masa yang seperti itu. Nah,
Time's up.
Ya, siapakah yang menjadi leaderboard
atau menjadi pemenang? Sekaligus mendapatkan ada 4 orang teratas. Asti Asmodiwati.
Dan jawabannya
adalah semua yang
semuanya
di atas
di atas.
benar
Oke,
semua.
17. Jadi pemenangnya mohon ditunjukkan lagi leaderboardnya 4 pemenang utama.
Yes, kita
yang paling
endorse-nya
atas siapa ini? Klasmen akhir adalah
Yeay, selamat kepada Bu Asti, Pak Aidil, dan satu lagi.
Pak Aidil dan satu lagi adalah Indar Atmojo.
Ya, luar biasa. Selamat.
Ini benar semua tapi kecuali satu nih. Jadi
Ya, baik. Kalau gitu selamat buat para pemenang dan thank you untuk yang belum beruntung mendapatkan hadiah. Jadi yang belum beruntung silakan ke kantor Apari untuk daftar ikut pendidikan. Tapi anyway, seru-seru ya. Selamat sekali lagi, dan dengan berakhirnya kuis Laidu ini maka berakhir pula acara kita pada pagi sampai dengan siang hari ini. Terima kasih kepada Sompo, kepada Coface sebagai sponsor kita. Mudah-mudahan apa yang kita lakukan bersama joint collaboration event ini antara Apari, Sompo, dan Coface bisa memberikan manfaat bagi kita semua. Sekali lagi terima kasih kepada speakers, juga kepada teman-teman audiens.
Yep, thank you to all our colleagues in Coface for their time and effort. Special thanks to Apari for the support, all the technical crew for putting all this together, to Pak Bambang Suseno, and to everybody involved today. Thank you very much. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay happy.
Pantun sebelum penutup, bunga mawar, bunga melati, dirangkai indah di dalam vas. Salam hormat dan terima kasih untuk Sompo Insurance dan Coface.
Oke, terima kasih. Saya Putu Kusumadi Wijaya dengan
saya Cici Marsiana
dan
Wina Syakuntala
serta
Riki Natapraja
mengucapkan terima kasih. Mohon maaf bila ada kekurangan dan kesalahan dalam perhelatan hari ini. Tidak ada yang sempurna kecuali Allah, pemilik dari kesempurnaan. Sampai bertemu di perhelatan Apari berikutnya. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Sampai jumpa. Ingat TCI, ingat Sompo.